Fuck off, asshole, or you'll regret it. I raised my head from the ground and saw the new girl screaming at the bully. She was smaller than me, but she showed no fear. Her blonde pigtails stood up as she stood between me and my tormentor on the playground. A white shirt covered by a light paisley dress partially obscured my view. "Or what, shorty?" Big Hank laughed. With the speed of a cobra, she stepped forward and struck him. She turned to me, pulled me by the hand, and we ran to the other side of the site. When we stopped, both out of breath, I looked at the little girl who had just saved me from yet another beating. "SP, thank you," I stammered. She looked at me and gave me the sweetest smile. "Please," she said, extending her hand to me, and I shook it. "I'm Sadie." This innocent encounter was the beginning of a wonderful friendship with a girl who would become the biggest influence on my life. Until Sadie literally came into my life, I had always been introverted and weird. An only child in a family where parents were too old to have children, I was severely behind in social skills. In short, I couldn't fit in. Anywhere, including my own home. Don't get me wrong, my parents loved me unconditionally. They just weren't ready to raise a child in their 50s. My mother was forced to return to work to cope with finances. They worked hard to support their accidental child, and I couldn't blame them. They really tried. Sadie's effect on me was almost immediate. With childish innocence, she persistently helped me deal with my problems and complexes. She never judged, and no matter how awkward things got, she never left me for cooler friends. She was constantly surrounded by popular kids, and they told her to get rid of the nerd, all this right in front of my eyes. One time a girl got it for calling me a loser in front of Sadie. My friend Sadie was a real fighter. I suspected that in the future we would gradually move away. She was a beautiful and versatile girl, and I was just an inconspicuous person. She, of course, found new friends and played sports, but she didn't leave me. We met at my locker every day, had lunch together often, and still walked together when she had free time. I knew things would change in the future, but my friendship with Sadie continued. She never gave up on me, and when someone cool tried to target me, she always defended me. Few were prepared to face an angry Sadie. Despite her height of only 163 centimeters and a fragile physique, she was a real hurricane if you angered her. Soon my best friend started dating guys. I still remember that day when we were walking along one of our favorite routes, and she suddenly spoke. "Hey, Eduardo, can I talk to you?" My real name is Edward, but back in the 4th grade, she started calling me Eduardo. She thought it sounded cooler than Edward. Edward, she says, is a name for old people. Of course, what happened? Do you know Darius Rucker? Darius, that guy from the football team. He was the kicker on our football team. I didn't know him personally, but I heard about him. At least he wasn't your typical idiot jock. He's the one. She looked at me, waiting for a reaction. And I encouraged her. "Well, he asked me out on a date, and I wanted to know what you thought about it." I immediately felt uneasy at the thought of her being with another guy, but I quickly suppressed this feeling. Sadie clearly refused to date for fear that I would feel left out, but we were already 18 years old, and I knew that sooner or later I would be the third wheel. I just hoped it would happen later. "Well, he's not exactly my type," I began to joke, for which I received a good hit on the shoulder. "Oh, hey, violence, violence," I shouted into the emptiness of the forest. "Don't be a jerk, Eduardo." She stood in front of me, blocking the way, and looked me straight in the face. "So, you don't mind?" I looked into her worried eyes. All I ever wanted in my short life was for my best friend to be happy, no matter how that happened. "I'm not your boyfriend, Sadie. You can date whoever you want. I won't hold you back." She continued to look at me, considering my words. "It won't change anything between us, Edward. I love what we have." Whenever she used my real name, it meant she was serious. "Ooh, Edward, huh? It's unlikely that your boyfriend will like that your best friend is a guy, even if that nerd is me." She hugged me so hard that my bones almost cracked. "Then it won't be my boyfriend. You and I are one, nerd." I hugged her back, and as always, She made me feel like the most important person in her life again. This is what she has been doing ever since she stood up for me on the playground that fateful day. My world began and ended with Sadie, and I wanted her to always be happy. Nothing serious worked out with Darius, but it was a new stage in the life of my best friend. Sadie effortlessly became more and more popular, and more guys invited her for a date. She turned down many people, but said yes to Marcus Young, another football player, but he was the main star of our school, an enviable quarterback with endless offers from colleges, a real man among boys, 190 centimeters tall and with a powerful physique. Seeing them together always made me smile. His height and size compared to my little Sadie were comical, and the extreme contrast in their appearance made the pair even more attractive. While Sadie was very light and blonde, Marcus was jet black. Even his eyes were so dark brown that they appeared black. Unlike most of her previous suitors, Marcus was clearly hostile towards me. It wasn't that the other guys wanted to be my best friends, but they understood that I was important to Sadie and at least tried to be polite. Marcus showed contempt from the very beginning. I heard Sadie tell him off more than once, but he just laughed in response. He called me her pet and treated me worse than a hamster. Sadie was always sensitive to my feelings and closely monitored my condition. She hugged me, whispered tender words, assuring me that I was still important to her. She always knew how to cheer me up, and although it seemed that she wanted to continue her relationship with Marcus, I, as an adult, did everything to not show my displeasure for her sake. One day, when Sadie couldn't have lunch with me, Marcus and a couple of his friends pinned me against the wall outside the dining room. "Hey, Eddie, how are you?" I immediately became wary. He never called me Eddie. However, it seems that he never called me by name at all. Using his height and strength, he began to slowly push me against the wall. "Listen, Ed, I want to invite Sadie to the party. We'll have big plans for this special evening, so I'd like you to give us some privacy." Yes, of course. You won't even notice I'm there. That's right, because you won't be there. Do you understand what I mean? He looked at my confused face. If you go, she will watch you all evening, like a nanny, and I don't want anything to distract her. I need her full attention. Understand? I nodded more out of fear than agreement. That's good. And don't even think about telling Sadie about this conversation. She'll be mad at me, and my friends will be mad at you. And you understand what will happen next, right? I nodded again. He patted me on the shoulder, and he and his friends walked away down the corridor, laughing. Not even 30 seconds had passed before Sadie appeared around the corner. I think she saw the fear in my eyes. "Eduardo, are you okay?" She ran up to me and put her hand on my face. "What's happened?" Nothing. I have to go to class, Sadie. I'll catch up with you later." I tried to leave, but she grabbed my hand and pushed me against the wall again. "Oh no, that won't do. What happened, Edward?" My lips didn't move. "Did someone offend you?" I was too scared to answer. I was afraid that I would be beaten, but even more afraid that I would ruin her relationship. I saw Marcus talking to him, a shy boy I barely knew suddenly said. Sadie looked at him, then back at me. Apparently, everything was clear from my face, even though I was silent. "My Marcus?" I couldn't answer. Crap. She let go of me and ran down the corridor. I recognized her gait. She was furious. I turned to the guy. "It would be better if you didn't say anything." He apologized embarrassedly and walked in the other direction. From a distance, I heard screams and decided to go see what was happening. A small crowd had already gathered around, and in the center, I saw Marcus by his height. He looked down, and I realized it was Sadie he was arguing with. As I got closer, I heard that the argument was about me. I tried to blend into the crowd without anyone noticing. "He's just stupid, Sadie, don't you see? He may be a little slow, but he's not stupid. He is the kindest person I know and my best friend. Maybe you should go to a party with your idiot then." "What? What did you just say?" "You heard me. He follows you like a lost puppy, does everything to make his queen happy, listens to your every word as if it were holy truth, while you are having affairs with the guys from the team." Sadie's face turned purple with anger. This is nonsense, Marcus, and you know it. Take back your words. What exactly? The fact that you are a woman of easy virtue, or the fact that your friend is weak-minded? Sadie lunged at him, and he hit her. Find yourself another gentleman, dear. I have a line of girls dreaming of going to a party with me. He laughed, and at that moment everything went dark for me. I slowly woke up from the annoying sound. I tried to open my eyes, but only the right one opened. The light blinded me, and I closed my eyes from the sudden change. When my eyes became accustomed to the light, I began to look around. The ceiling and walls were painted a bland white, with no paintings or posters. The window on the right looked out onto the treetops, but they didn't seem familiar to me. My gaze continued to wander around the room, and I noticed a portable table with papers and files. There was a car nearby with flashing red numbers. The longer I looked at her, the more I realized that this annoying sound was coming from her. Why would anyone want something like that in their bedroom? I noticed some wires and began to follow them with my eyes towards the floor. Losing sight of them, I saw clear tubes attached to my arm just above my wrist. Wait a minute. I turned my head and saw a counter with 2 bags of liquid. This is not good. I looked around again and noticed that the wires from the car were stretching onto my bed and going to my chest. Whose pajamas are these? My curiosity was interrupted when I heard her voice. Edward. I turned my head and saw Sadie jump up from the ugly red chair. Oh God, you're awake. Maybe this is a dream. You're in it, I tried to joke, but my remark brought tears to her eyes, and I immediately felt guilty. Sadie, are you okay? My heart beat faster. Why is she crying? The next moment she rushed at me, hugging me as tightly as she could in my awkward position. You've finally decided to grace us with your presence, said a voice at the door, which made Sadie shrink away from me. Sorry, doctor. He woke up, and I just wanted to hug him. Her voice trembled. Her voice never wavered. Sadie, I hoped she was okay. It's okay, dear. Just don't press it too hard. The owner of the voice came closer. She was tall, or so it seemed, with dark long hair, wearing a white robe over a red blouse. The stethoscope around her neck matched her appearance, although I still couldn't understand what was going on. Edward, I'm Dr. Matthews. Do you know where you are? I looked at her, then at Sadie. I looked around the room again to take it all in. In the hospital. Right. Now the next question will be more difficult. Do you know why you ended up in the hospital? The question seemed quite simple, but my mind was completely empty. I tried to remember something, but nothing came. My attempts were interrupted when I heard Sadie sob quietly. Sadie, I looked at her. The doctor quickly intervened to distract me from Sadie. It's okay, Edward. You've been through quite the ordeal. Everything will be remembered when your brain is ready. It seemed to me that Sadie was having a hard time holding back her sobs. Sadie, I guess my concern for my best friend convinced the doctor to back off, and Sadie came closer. Why are you crying? Who offended you? She looked at me for a few seconds, then ran out of the room, sobbing. I tried to get up and run after her, but the wires, stiffness in my body, and the doctor's hand did not allow me to do this. She's not hurt, Edward. It's just very hard for her to see you in this state. When she calms down, she'll come back. Okay? But why? I began, but I was interrupted by the voices of my parents when they entered the room. Edward, cute. My mother ran up to me and kissed me on the forehead. She was followed by her father, who patted my hand. Both looked exhausted and seemed older. Hello, Mom. Hello, Dad. Can anyone tell me why I'm here and what happened? And why is Sadie so upset? Did I do something? My father pulled out some chairs for my mother and the doctor. The 3 of them began to talk. It turned out that I got into a fight, although apparently it was not really a fight. I attacked the guy who hit Sadie, but he and his friends fought me back. I looked at my parents and the doctor. There were so many questions in my head that I didn't know where to start. When? When did this happen? Mom leaned towards me, pushing the hair away from my forehead. It was 3 weeks ago, dear. 3 weeks ago, I was shocked. Why don't I remember anything? It seems that the doctor read my thoughts because she immediately spoke. You suffered serious head injuries and we were forced to put you into a medically induced coma. This is sometimes necessary after a serious injury. This gives the brain time to recover. She smiled at me. But your willpower brought you back to life. I just looked at the three of them and didn't know what to say. Or rather, it wasn't like that. Why don't I feel pain? I only feel a headache, and I can't see out of my left eye. The eye should be fine. The swelling has not gone away yet, but in a week it will go away. Regarding pain, we are studying this issue. Some people's brains work differently, but we are running tests and hope to have answers soon. It was too much. I couldn't stand it. Mother, Dad, can you find Sadie and make sure she's okay? I want to be alone. Is this possible? I looked at the doctor and then at my parents. Of course, dear. You need rest. We'll talk to Sadie. Don't worry about her, okay? I watched as the parents and doctor left the room. Then he looked at the boring ceiling. My eye caught some kind of hole or puncture. Then I saw another one. I spent the next few hours counting the holes and making shapes and patterns out of them. I didn't know why, but it always helped me relax, and today was no exception. I was immersed in my usual thoughts, not noticing how much time had passed, when I heard quiet footsteps approaching my room. My attention focused on Sadie. She approached the bed. Hello, Sadie. Are you feeling better? She looked at me like I was the biggest idiot in the world. Seriously, Eduardo, you just woke up after 3 weeks in the hospital, and you're wondering if I'm okay. Well, are you okay? She shook her head and took my hand in hers. Yes, Edward, I'm fine. She rolled her eyes. I loved it when she did that. She looked cute. Did my parents find you? Yes, we found it. We had a good talk. I really like your parents, you know. They are like a second mom and dad to me. More like grandparents, I smiled. At their age, my parents could have been grandparents a long time ago. Don't talk about your mom and dad like that. She hit me on the shoulder playfully. I pretended to be in pain, but she didn't believe me. Listen, there are a couple of policemen in the corridor. They want to talk to you. Your parents gave permission, but said that the decision is yours. Police, did I do something bad, Sadie? I was a little scared of what I might have done during my blackout. No, 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 she stroked my hand. They just need to ask a few questions about what happened. They've been waiting all this time for you to wake up. When I nodded, she walked out the door and returned with a man and a woman in dark blue uniforms. Their bodies were loaded with equipment, bulletproof vests with walkie-talkies attached to them, a pistol in a holster, handcuffs, and something else on the belt. I wouldn't want to be a police officer, it quotes too much to carry around all the time. Officer Davidson, this is Edward Anderson, Sadie introduced us. A tall blonde man came up to my bed and smiled. Hello, Edward. Glad to see you're awake. He glanced over his shoulder. This is my partner, Officer Simpson. We'd like to ask you some questions about what happened. Do you mind? I looked at Sadie and she nodded encouragingly. Can she stay? I pointed to my best friend. Of course, Edward, the female officer smiled. So what can you tell me about what happened that day? That's the problem. I don't remember anything. I only know what happened because the parents and the Dr. Matthews told me. So, nothing at all? Asked the tall blonde. I shook my head slowly. Do you remember how I asked you who offended you? Sadie spoke quietly, standing behind the officers. I saw you in the dining room. You looked scared. I asked what happened, and you tried to leave. And you pushed me against the wall. I finished her sentence. Scraps of images and words suddenly appeared in my head, forcing me to close my eyes to try to make sense of the avalanche of information. It's okay, Edward. Take your time. Take your time, I heard Officer Simpson advise. I suddenly felt the familiar touch of Sadie's hands stroking my head. Eduardo, relax, okay? Let the memories form. Just listen to my voice, okay? She started humming, and I immediately felt myself relaxing under her hands. It helped. The more I focused on Sadie's voice and touch, the clearer my mind became. I started slowly. Marcus stopped me after lunch. He wanted me not to go to the party because he was afraid that you would worry about me and I would ruin his evening. He also told me not to tell you about it because you would get mad at him and then his friends would be mad at me. I took a deep breath and continued. I heard screams from the corridor where you went. When I got there, I saw a crowd surrounding you. He, he called me stupid, but you said I was just slow. My eyes opened and I looked at Sadie. Do you really think I'm slow? Her face turned pale. What else do you remember, Edward? Keep going while it's fresh. Officer Simpson encouraged me. Basically, he called me names and you got angry. When you rushed at him. When you rushed. I began to breathe heavily. Emotions surfaced very quickly. He hit my Sadie. I could barely speak, and Sadie hugged me, trying to calm me down with her hum. Do you remember anything else, Edward? The officer continued to push. I caught my breath and sobbed a couple of times. No. The next thing I remember is waking up here. The officers exchanged glances before the tall blonde man approached my bed again. We have over 15 affidavits that confirm that although you attacked Marcus, he hit you unjustifiably. He was expelled for the rest of the year, and we are here to see if you want to file a formal claim for aggravated assault. Circumstances. But you said that I attacked him. Yes, but any argument about self-defense ends when his friends hold you down, and he continues to beat you. I don't want to file a lawsuit. Sadie released her embrace and looked at me angrily. What? Of course you do, Edward. You can't let him get away with it. Are you still going to date him? I looked at her. What? Of course not. I left him that same day. She screamed at me. That's all that matters. He wasn't worthy of you. Mr. Anderson, if I were you, I would listen to my friend. Your condition is still being assessed. Some damage may be irreversible. Well, I was already slow. How much slower can I get? I didn't want to seem sarcastic or argumentative. It seemed quite logical. And I was the one who attacked him first, so I think to some extent it was deserved. I watched as both officers shook their heads. Well, if you change your mind, here's my business card. Officer Simpson placed the card on my desk, and they both left the room. Sadie looked at me, and I started to feel awkward. She seemed to have stopped blinking. I can't believe you're letting that bastard get away with it. Her voice was flat and angry. I can't believe you even dated him. Her face turned red and I smiled, letting her know I was just teasing her. Move over, Eduardo. She pushed me to the side, making room for her small body to settle next to me. She pressed herself tightly to me and hugged me. In all the years I knew Sadie, we never hugged. Even when watching movies on the couch. She often hugged me in public, but this was the first time. I felt the light scent of her hair, her breath, how her chest rose and fell, the warmth of her body. All these sensations were new to me, and I had difficulty trying to comprehend them. The longer she lay next to me, the more I relaxed. And just as I began to get used to this new moment for us, she gave me another unexpected surprise. I love you, Eduardo. Her soft voice was almost inaudible, but I heard her clearly. I spent another 2 weeks in the hospital. My eye got better, but as it turned out, the doctors wanted to keep an eye on it. During my stay, I learned 2 things about myself. It turns out I had congenital pain insensitivity SIP, also known as congenital analgesia. This is a rare disease in which a person does not feel physical pain. According to my parents, this explained a lot to them. It also explained why I never really cared about all those playground confrontations. It always seemed more like an inconvenience than a pain. The second thing I learned was about my behavior. While testing my cognitive abilities for brain damage, doctors concluded that I had signs of a spectrum disorder known as Asperger's ASD. This explained my difficulties in communicating with other people and some of my repetitive actions. It also explained my emotional detachment from most things and people, with the exception of my parents and probably Sadie. Dr. Matthews spent a lot of time explaining to my parents what options were available for people with my diagnosis. Considering also the long-term consequences of traumatic brain injury, the situation became even more complex. All this cost money, and I saw more and more wrinkles appear on my parents' faces. After a long group meeting in which I insisted that Sadie participate, we came up with a plan that would allow me to get help and support through counseling and guidance. Given my penchant for detail and repetitive actions, I was offered a placement in a more technical educational field. This turned out to be a good idea as I quickly learned programming, design, and logistics. Sadie was supposed to go to Boston to study, but decided to stay and go to our local university. It wasn't the best school in her field of interest, writing and journalism, but she wanted to stay close to me. I still remember the day of our biggest fight. I was upset that she sacrificed her goals for me. I never wanted her to leave, but it would be the best decision for her. What had lasted for weeks was over, and it changed my life forever. Sadie, why? I'm doing well, and I have my parents and Dr. Sullivan to help. I don't understand why you sacrifice your future. Well, it's my decision, Eduardo. My place is here. That's not the answer. I have been a burden to you almost your entire life. It's time for you to do something for yourself. Do you want to get rid of me? Is that what you mean? Everything has become fine, and you don't want me around anymore. One thing I learned from Dr. Sullivan, my psychologist, is that my brain and body can only handle a certain level of stress. That's why I rarely get angry, and even when I do, I've learned to refocus. In moments of great stress, my parents helped me, but everyone knew that Sadie was my support. She kept me grounded and helped me concentrate. Her voice and touch could calm me like no other. Even Dr. Sullivan was surprised by her effect on me. It was true. Everything was better when she was around. But I was not selfish, and despite my difficulties in understanding emotions, I knew that for her own good, she needed to continue living her life. I want you to do what's right for you, Sadie. I can't imagine my life without you, but I'm not asking you to leave me. I'm asking you to do something for yourself. I'll be here when you come back, if you come back. The words had barely left my lips when she started hitting me. I covered my head to protect my face from her sudden and unexpected outburst. You're an asshole. How can you say that? Damn idiot. Her last blow was more of a weak attempt to hit me. She leaned exhaustively against the wall and burst into tears. I had no idea what I said was wrong. We've argued and disagreed before, but that wasn't like her. I stood and watched as her body shook with sobs. Sadie, what did I say? She took a few minutes to compose herself, wiping away the last of her tears, and looked at me, blowing a strand of blonde hair out of her eyes. Nothing. You didn't say anything wrong. Please tell me, what did I do to upset you, Sadie? My body began to react to the stressful situation. I was confused by her outburst. I didn't understand why she was crying. I was making her upset, and I didn't know how to fix it. Sadie was immediately there, noticing my signs. She hugged me and pressed her head against my chest. It's It's okay, Edward. Everything is fine. I'm fine. Just hug me. I did so, and soon she began to hum. Her melodious sounds and hugs brought me back to normal. My body began to relax. We stood for a long time, silently embracing. Despite my desire for her to go away to study, I knew that I could never replace her. Living without her would be very difficult. Realizing this, I pressed her closer to me. I love you, Edward. I love you too, Sadie. Since I was hospitalized, we have become more open about expressing the depth of our friendship. When she pulled away, I expected to see her sweet smile, but it was nowhere to be found. No, Edward, I love you. And I love you, I love you. She looked into my eyes. I don't know if you feel the same way, Edward, but I've loved you for so long, and I'm finally starting to realize what that means. I tried to understand what she meant. How was her love different from ordinary love? To answer my question, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed me on the lips. I don't think it was the most romantic kiss because my lips didn't move. She ended the kiss and looked at me. "Do you love me, Edward? So you love me as a woman and not just as a good friend?" Emotions have always been difficult for me. It's not that I didn't feel them, I just had a hard time dealing with them or expressing them. But something inside me broke through these walls. It was as if something inside me had awakened for the first time. I looked at her lips and, without thinking, kissed her back. Sadie was my first kiss, my first girlfriend. Well, she was my first and only one in everything. We started dating from then on through college, and 3 years later we got married. Sometimes I struggled because I felt like I wasn't giving her everything she deserved. She was always careful with me, not knowing when my emotions would get out of control, and every time she hugged me to calm me down. She was more like my anchor, my protection. More than once my psychologist called Sadie my guardian angel. Her ability to read my moods and intervene with touch both delighted and surprised Dr. Sullivan. It turned out that people with my characteristics usually have difficulty perceiving physical touch or expressions of affection, but in my case, everything was different. She was the only one whose touch had a positive effect on me. She was the one who taught me about sex. I didn't think much about it, but I knew it was important to Sadie, so I tried to be her best student. Kissing was easy, and it was the most comfortable thing for me. The biggest obstacle was letting her touch. Well, my private parts. Despite my awkwardness, she never showed that it annoyed her. On the contrary, she showed incredible patience. Luckily, after a few months of her persistence and patience, I began to feel comfortable with her touch and even learned to reciprocate it. We spent the evenings in bed. Her patience and ability to teach me what to do and how to do it again amazed Dr. Sullivan. Our life went on as usual. Sadie worked in a publishing house as an editor, dreaming of one day becoming a writer. In my opinion, she was a very talented author, and I was sure that it was only a matter of time. I myself worked at a large technology company in the programming department. Despite numerous offers for higher positions with better salaries, I preferred the routine of my work. I could work from anywhere, but most days I was in my home office. At Sadie's urging, I began developing my own virtual game. The idea was to create a quest with hidden object elements, but without the need to race around the city. I got this idea when Sadie talked about her college experience. It was supposed to be a fun day, but one group got into an accident while chasing the next clue. Fortunately, everyone survived, but one girl was forced to leave the educational institution to recover from her injuries. I met several computer geeks online who were also developing their own ideas, and we shared the challenges we faced. I think we were competitors to some extent, but I was always happy to help if I could. I became friends with a talented digital designer who helped me with the visuals to support my concept. We weren't rich, but we were doing well. Sadie tried to get me to travel and was making good progress until my mother died unexpectedly. I stopped all my activities and tried to always be with my father. Sadie continued to work, but tried to be there as often as possible. Unfortunately, 3 months later, my father also died. Doctors said it was a heart attack, but Sadie called it heartbreak. The father was slowly losing the will to live. Since Sadie came into my life, my father no longer worried about my future. When Mom died, he seemed to give up. Saying goodbye to my parents was hard for me, but with the help of Dr. Sullivan and my wife, I was able to come to terms with being alone. Well, not completely alone, just without parents. As long as Sadie was there, I knew everything would be okay. One day, we were sitting on our back porch, watching the sun slowly sink below the horizon, swinging on our hanging chair when Sadie asked me a question. This was the moment that I would later remember as the beginning of the collapse of my happy world. "Edward, can I ask you a favor?" Her voice seemed strained for such a simple question. Of course, whatever. She seemed to be struggling with her thoughts before speaking. "I've been going to a therapist for a while now, and I was wondering if you'd come with me next time." I was shocked. I had no idea that she was dating someone. I was also offended that she didn't tell me about it because she knows about my weekly sessions with Dr. Sullivan. "Of course, I'll go. Why didn't you tell me you were going to see someone? Everything is fine." Yes, everything is fine. You're not the only one who needs help sometimes, and I've been trying to cope with some things for a while. My therapist was very helpful, and he suggested that you come with me next time. He thinks this might help me. You know, like when Dr. Sullivan sometimes asks me to come to your sessions. Sadie was always involved in my therapy, and despite the initial shock, I was happy to help her. If he thinks it will help you, then of course I'll go. I smiled at her, expecting a smile in return. She was there, but not like usual. A week later, we were sitting in a very cozy office on a leather sofa and waiting for her therapist, Mr. James. Sadie seemed nervous and restless, so I took her hand to let her know I was there. Before I could say anything, a tall black man wearing a red V-neck sweater over a shirt and tie walked into the room and sat down across from us in a large chair. I apologize for the wait. Sadie, good to see you again. Edward, my name is Curtis James. Nice to meet you. He extended his hand for a handshake. I hesitated for a moment, but Sadie nudged me, reminding me of social etiquette. Sadie has said a lot of good things about you, and I'm glad you're here today for her. I don't know how I can help, but I'll do anything for Sadie. He smiled widely when he heard my words. I'm glad to hear that, he said, which made me wonder at his choice of words. I looked at Sadie, and suddenly my stomach tightened. She looked at the floor without raising her eyes. So, Edward, today we will talk about very sensitive topics, topics that may confuse Sadie and that may be difficult for you to understand. But I want you to know that this is a safe space, and remember that we are trying to help your wife. You understand? I looked at Sadie again, but she didn't look up. I looked at Mr. James, who was waiting for my answer with a smile. The best I could do was nod slightly. Well done. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his legs. So, Edward, Sadie and I have been dating for about 6 months now, and we felt like it was time for you to hook up to move on. I nodded again out of habit. This will not be easy to hear, but I ask you to keep an open mind. Sadie wasn't ready to discuss this with you herself, so she asked me to help her start the conversation. For I don't even know how long, Mr. James explained to me that my wife felt unsatisfied because her sexual needs were not being met. He talked about my lack of experience, despite Sadie's attempts to train me, that my disorders and subsequent head injury could have been part of the problem, that of course no one could be blamed for that. He asked if I thought our sex life was satisfactory, and of course I said yes. He then pointed out that my perception might be limited because I had only been with one woman, my wife. I looked at Sadie several times, but she never looked up at me. At some point, I stopped processing Mr. James's words until he said something that puzzled me. Sorry, what did you say? Well, there is one more issue regarding physical disabilities that needs to be discussed. Disadvantages, what is he talking about? I looked at Sadie with a question, but she still couldn't look me in the eyes. Edward, I know you perceive information differently, but the truth is, the size. Sadie? My body immediately tensed, and Sadie immediately realized that I was on the verge. She hugged me, pressing herself against my chest. It's okay, Edward, she whispered to me. Sadie, you have to be completely honest. Otherwise, this jeopardizes our chances of solving the problem, Mr. James intervened. Not since my mother's unexpected death have I felt so lost. It was as if I was not in my body, as if I was not here. Only my wife's hugs and her soft humming kept me in place. Edward, we need to approach this from an adult perspective. Sadie gave the therapist the angriest look I've ever seen. Leave me alone, she said sharply. The therapist wisely shut up, which gave me time to process the information without his interference. I had no idea Sadie was suffering so much. Not once did she hint that she was unhappy. Apparently, she always cared only about me. I took all the energy from her without giving anything in return. Now I was no longer angry, but I was ashamed that I did not know this. Sadie, why? Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy? She raised her head, but continued to hug me tightly. I love you with all my heart, Edward. How could I talk to you about this? I felt selfish. And that's why I'm here, to have Mr. James say it for you. No, I mean, yes. But initially, I came here to cope with my selfishness. The more I said, the more Mr. James convinced me that I might begin to feel resentment or bitterness towards you, and I couldn't live with it. I, I thought size didn't matter. I heard this somewhere. In general, this is true, Edward. But in some cases, it can play a role. Your inexperience and BPD may be exacerbating this problem for a woman. I didn't like Mr. James. He seemed smug, but I knew he was just trying to help Sadie. And what can I do to help? I'm no genius, but I know I can't just make it bigger. You're right, Edward, but Sadie and I have discussed several possible solutions that might help. I looked at Sadie, who was still hugging me tightly. She needed me to know that she wasn't going anywhere. We were talking about maybe introducing toys or something, she said, noticing my confusion. Now I understand. Maybe we could use them together when we make love. She looked at me hopefully. I don't want them in me, I blurted out, which made her laugh. Her laugh was so cute, even in this situation. No, Eduardo, we could use them on me. She watched my reaction as I considered her proposal. If you really think this will help, Sadie, then you know I would do anything for you. But, are you sure you're ready for this? I don't want you to start hating the toy and then me at the same time. I thought for a moment, but I thought I was being honest. I won't be able to say for sure until we try, but I'll do it for you, Sadie. She hugged me even tighter, and I was finally able to hug her back. You're making the right decision, Edward. I know it's hard for a man to put his ego aside, but whatever it means to you, I'm proud of what you're willing to do for the woman you love. Maybe this man isn't so bad after all, I thought. Do you want to go pick something together? I don't know. Maybe you should just buy something. I don't even know what to look for or what to suggest. Okay, I can do it, she replied. Mr. James continued talking for some time, but I was no longer listening to him. My mind was busy processing what had happened. Although the heart was with Sadie, my stomach was still clenched with anxiety. The rest of the week went by as usual. I didn't bring up the topic of our session and was grateful that Sadie didn't mention it either. I think part of me hoped she had forgotten or changed her mind, but reality soon caught up with me that night. Sadie came to bed in her sexy night dress, and I immediately knew what that meant, so without hesitation, I pulled off my boxers under the covers and threw them on the floor. She sat down on the bed next to me and started stroking my head. Honey, how would you like to try something new today? There was a lump in my throat, but I swallowed it. You mean a toy? She nodded, carefully watching my reaction. If it helps you, Sadie, I'll try. She leaned over and kissed my forehead. I love you so much, Edward. I hope you know that. With these words, she reached over to her nightstand and took something out of the drawer. When she showed it to me, I instantly felt nauseous. I can put it away, honey. We don't have to try it today. Sadie reached over to put it back in the drawer. Wait, I grabbed her hand. I promised that I would try. She carefully watched my actions. I want you to be happy, Sadie, I finished. How about we just lay it here next to me and see how the night unfolds? Fine. Edward, are you okay? Yes. I just need to go to the toilet. I quickly got out of bed and headed to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. After sitting on the toilet for a while, I heard someone try to open the door. When the handle didn't work, Sadie knocked softly. Edward, cute, please let me in. After a few minutes of not moving, she knocked again. Edward, please, you're scaring me. She knew I couldn't let her worry, so I raised my hand and unlocked the door. She walked in slowly and knelt down in front of me. She started stroking my legs and tried to catch my eye. Edward, look at me, please. Finally, I met her dark brown eyes. It's okay, baby. Everything is fine. For the first time in my life, I didn't believe her. She eventually helped me back to bed, where she wrapped her arm and leg around me, snuggled me, and rested her head on my shoulder. I didn't say a word after sex, afraid to say anything. Questions, doubts, and anger swarmed in my head. I didn't know how to express all this, so I remained silent. Sadie sang and whispered to me, but even that didn't help. Long hours passed before I finally fell asleep, but even then I only relived the events of the evening again and again, as if in a nightmare. I woke up a short time later, sweating from dreams. Carefully freeing myself from my wife's embrace, I put on my robe and went to the kitchen. I didn't usually drink tea, but suddenly it was the only thing I wanted. Sadie used loose-leaf tea, and I had to find a small metal strainer. I opened several drawers until I found it, but something lying nearby caught my attention. I don't know why, but I took this item and quietly returned to our bedroom. I let my eyes get used to the darkness and began to carefully look for what I needed. When I found it on the floor, I picked it up and, using the small measuring tape I had with me, measured it. It was too dark to see, so I just pressed my finger against the mark on the tape, put the dildo back, and walked out into the hallway. As soon as there was enough light, I looked at my finger. It stood opposite the number 8. I suddenly felt nauseous and rushed to the bathroom, managing to lift the toilet lid in time. I vomited violently, but nothing came out except bile. I wanted to stop, but the cramps in my stomach didn't allow it. "Oh my God, Edward!" Sadie came running, clearly awakened by the noise. She began to rub my back and soothe me with words as I fought the urge to vomit. When I finally finished, Sadie stood up and wet a towel, wiping my face and forehead. "What's going on, Edward? Are you sick?" I turned to her and picked up the measuring tape that was still in my hand, with my finger on the figure 8. "Is this what you need to be happy, Sadie? 8 inches? Am I such a disappointment to you that you have to replace me with this artificial one?" There was an expression of shock on her face at my attack. "What do you think about when you use it? Obviously, you don't think about me. I can never make you feel the same. I can't believe you even married me. Why marry someone who can so easily be replaced by an artificial one?" "Edward, I will never replace you. I love you with all my heart and soul. Please don't say that." "You looked so happy, Sadie. I've never seen you so happy. I can never make you feel like this." She quickly hugged me and started crying. "I'm so sorry, Edward. I'm so sorry I hurt you. I was selfish. Please, please forgive me. I will never make you do this again. I promise, honey. Please don't ever say that again. I love you and need you." She cried quietly on my shoulder. I suddenly felt selfish, but I didn't want to discuss it anymore. At least not right now. A few weeks passed, and Sadie and I discussed that evening more times than I would have liked. But she said it was important to share feelings. Dr. Sullivan always said the same thing, so I knew she was right. I was in such a state that I tried to survive it. I wanted to get over it, but thoughts about that evening surfaced at the most inopportune moments. We've tried to have sex several times since then, but I still haven't been able to. Sadie was understanding and cried more than once, blaming herself for ruining what we had. I felt guilty for my reaction, but there seemed to be no way for me to overcome what was causing me to break. I also knew that this was becoming increasingly difficult for Sadie, and I had to do something to fix it. Or myself. Typically, my sessions with Dr. Sullivan focused on how to adapt and understand the intricacies of social interactions and integration. We talked about Sadie sometimes, but mostly it was reaffirming how wonderful she was to me. Finally, I decided that I should bring up our current situation in this week's session. "You've seemed distracted these last few weeks, Edward. Is something bothering you? Here is the place to break it down and help you find the tools to solve the problem. I've always been uncomfortable talking about sex, even with my wife, but after much thought, I realized I had to do it. For Sadie's sake. I recently realized that I could not satisfy Sadie. I saw Dr. Sullivan trying to understand the ambiguity of my statement. Sexually, I've failed her, Dr. Sullivan, and I don't know how to fix it. It took almost an hour for me to talk about Sadie's experiences with a therapist, and then my participation in those sessions. I tried my best to explain the whole situation with the toy, expressing my feelings as best I could, as Dr. Sullivan expected of me. I talked about the last few weeks and the nightmare our sex life had become, as well as my feelings of guilt for not being man enough for the only woman I could ever love. I finally understood how that man from the movie Alien felt when the creature tore him apart from the inside. That's exactly how I felt that emptiness in my stomach. Edward, first, let's breathe like I taught you. Focus on and close the curtains on the negative emotions you're feeling, Dr. Sullivan said. I followed her advice, focusing on my breathing, trying to clear the thoughts that were tormenting me from my head. I closed my eyes and began to practice visualization techniques. The more I focused, the slower my stress went away. Dr. Sullivan gave me a few more minutes before continuing. That's a lot to process, Edward, for anyone. This is not just a problem for you, it would be difficult for anyone with a conscience. I don't have all the answers right now, but let's try to understand some of the issues. Okay? I nodded in agreement. First of all, let me say that I'm impressed that Sadie decided to approach this issue rationally. Her going to see a therapist was both brave and proactive, and I think it's important that you acknowledge that, Edward. This was not some kind of conspiracy. This was a woman who loved you and tried to find answers to difficult questions. Sadie loves you, Edward, and you can see it from a mile away. She's great, but she's not perfect. Like all of us, she too faces challenges. I nodded again in agreement. My entire life was centered around Sadie, and sometimes I expected her to always be perfect, because in my eyes, she was. But Dr. Sullivan taught me that it was unfair to place such a heavy burden on her shoulders. Now let's talk about what is most obvious: size. This is a problem for millions of men as well as women. Despite what society tells us, not all women want big. In fact, some are even afraid of them. Feelings of inadequacy can seriously undermine a man's ego. We all have egos, Edward. It is what makes us who we are. A lack of ego is as harmful as an excess of it. You were right when you said you couldn't make yourself bigger. But there's more to the male ego than just physical size, Edward. This is the strength and love that you give. It's doing something that's uncomfortable to make someone you love happy. So you're saying that I should accept this and suffer so that she can be sexually satisfied. Edward, no need to rephrase me. These are not my words and not my advice. I understand your inner feelings, but we need to have an honest and impartial conversation, okay? This has been one of my main problems in the past, taking things too literally or twisting someone's words to fit my ideas. I've gotten better at it, but obviously as soon as I start to feel uncomfortable, I fall back into old habits. Sorry, Dr. Sullivan. She smiled sweetly, accepting my apology. I believe that Sadie's desire to involve you in this is her way of maintaining a loving connection with you. This is the most important thing for her. By involving you in this process, she preserves two important elements: her sexual needs and her need to love you. She could be doing all this behind your back, Edward. Many couples do this because they have fantasies or needs and are worried that their partner will find it unattractive. Married people are no exception. Some do this with their partners, but most do it alone. So you think she's just bringing pleasure to herself? Yes, but she wants you to be part of her happiness. I don't know if I can do this, Dr. Sullivan. The way she was happy with it really touched me. It made me feel like a failure. I paused for a moment. And why did it have to be so big? Can I ask you a question, Edward? I nodded. Before you and Sadie started dating and got married, were there guys before you? Well, I didn't follow her, but I know the first guy she dated because she asked if it was okay for me. Then she dated or went on dates with others. The last serious guy I could call her real boyfriend was Marcus. Suddenly, I felt nauseous. Dr. Sullivan, is it true that black men are genetically larger? This is a rather specific question, Edward. I assume Marcus was black? No, he was a man. Even then, he was bigger than everyone else. I think he went to play for the college football team. I see, she replied. I think society has created a strong myth, Edward. There is no scientific evidence of this. In fact, I counsel some black men who, on the contrary, suffer from these stereotypes, and it has made their lives very difficult. I think that this is more likely due to the general physical constitution of a person. But to be honest, this is a complete coincidence. There is no mechanism to prove one way or the other. Now it was my turn to think about what I had heard. I tried to draw a parallel between Marcus, but even I had to admit that it was too complex a theory. Edward, what if? She hesitated for a second. What if Sadie used the toy herself when you weren't around? If you gave her your permission to do this, she could get her needs met, but you wouldn't have to be there to see it. She would be able to satisfy her sexual needs, and you would not experience the negative emotions that she causes in you. So she would have sex without me. No, she would satisfy her needs, but continue to have sexual relations with the man she loves. You would no longer feel threatened or humiliated, and she would no longer feel guilty about hurting you. So she could satisfy her needs, but at the same time maintain our sexual relationship. I asked, thinking about this scenario. Yes, that's right, Edward. She could get what she needs without hurting you. This could reduce tension and bring balance back to your relationship, Dr. Sullivan responded. I thought about her words. Can I ask one last question, Dr. Sullivan? If she was already doing this in secret, and I would never know about it, wouldn't our sex life still be the same? No problem. You want to say, what I don't know won't kill me, she clarified with a smile. Something like that, I answered, smiling shyly. Dr. Sullivan nodded seriously. Hidden things often remain outside our perception, and if we do not encounter them, they may not cause pain. But in your case, Edward, it is important that you understand that Sadie truly wanted you to be a part of her intimate life. She did not hide her desires from you because she values your union. It's not just sexual needs, it's about maintaining your emotional intimacy. I thought about her words, and then I remembered that earlier Marcus had used a word that I did not fully understand. I had a question that has remained unanswered since then. Can I ask you one more question, Dr. Sullivan? I looked at my watch. We're already half an hour late, Edward. She looked at her notebook, but to my surprise, she still agreed. Okay, one quick question. What is a voluntary cuckold? I asked. Dr. Sullivan's face was indescribable. This expression was one I had never seen on her face. She stood up from her chair and headed to her desk to press the buttons on her phone. Marley? Yes, Dr. Sullivan. Please reschedule my next appointment and convey my apologies to the client. I'm willing to come early any day this week to make up the time. Yes, Dr. Sullivan. Thank you, Marley. She returned to her chair and sat down opposite me again. Okay, Edward, let's start with when you first heard this word and in what context. I thought back to the day Marcus and Sadie were arguing in the hallway, moments before I was beaten. I never understood why he used that word, and Sadie never explained its meaning. Eventually, I just stopped asking. This is a very complex concept, she began. It was originally used to describe a man who takes care of a child, not knowing that he is not its father. Today, the word is often used to describe a certain sexual lifestyle. I hope this isn't what Sadie was suggesting. I shook my head. Fine. The idea behind this practice is that the woman assumes power in a sexual relationship. This may or may not be consensual, but either way there is an element of humiliation involved that gives the woman a sense of power. Sometimes this also satisfies her partner's needs. But any power in a romantic relationship, especially excessive power, can become destructive, and when this happens, the consequences are usually irreversible. Who would agree to humiliation? I asked with sincere bewilderment. Dr. Sullivan visibly winced. You'd be surprised what forms of deviation are attractive to people. It is very difficult to understand the psychology of such preferences, but to put it simply, Edward, in most cases, men who are turned on by this practice get pleasure from seeing their partner satisfied by another man, also because they themselves cannot give her such pleasure. I must have been lost in thought because Dr. Sullivan tapped my shoulder, and that brought me out of my reverie. Edward, are you okay? You retreated into yourself for a moment. Sorry. This was not what I expected to hear. I think it's clear now why Sadie never tried to explain this to me. It's a very personal thing, and it's different for everyone. What I do know is that it can cause serious damage to a relationship, especially to someone who succumbs to this practice. In my experience, no matter how confident people are that they are ready for this lifestyle, everyone eventually reaches a boiling point, and that's when the real suffering begins. When I got home, Sadie was waiting for me. I was much later than usual and lost in thoughts about today's session, completely forgetting to call her. "Edward, everything is fine. You've been gone for a long time," she said with concern. "Sorry, Dr. Sullivan had a long session today. Everything is fine. Should I come with you next time?" "No, everything is fine. We were just talking about hard things today. It was about us and, well, she blushed slightly. I also blushed, remembering the conversation. I had feelings that I couldn't understand, and I know you tried to help me, but I needed to hear it from her. Sadie took my hand and sat me down on the couch. And what did she say? In her eyes, I noticed something that I had seen only once on the day I woke up in the hospital. Then I didn't understand what kind of look it was, but now I realized that it was uncertain, and I didn't like it at all. She said I should respect you for the way you handled your problem. You could have just done it behind my back, but you wanted to involve me. She squeezed my hand and smiled. But I've also realized that, for some reason, I can't separate your pleasure from my inability to provide it. Every time we try to be close, I remember how you reacted to. You know what? It made me feel useless and unwanted. Oh, Eduardo, she hugged me tightly. You are everything to me. I feel loved and protected when you are near. I can't imagine my life without you. Even if you can't get any sexual pleasure. Until recently, I thought we were perfect for each other. But now I realize that I can't give you everything you need, Sadie, and I can't live with it. Her body tensed, and she pulled away from the hug. What? What does this mean, Edward? I looked her straight in the eyes, and despite the pain inside, I tried to overcome my ego. I think you should use a toy. I just can't be there. If this will help you achieve what you have been looking for a long time, then it would be unfair of me to deprive you of it. No, 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 she shook her head sharply. I saw what it did to you, what it did to us. I don't need it. We need it, Sadie, I said softly. How much longer will you give up your desires for me before you reach your boiling point? You didn't go to college because of me. You take care of me all the time. My features do not allow you to live life to the fullest. I feel like an anchor pulling you down. And now you are ready to deprive yourself of sexual satisfaction because of me. What kind of husband am I after this? This is not the same thing. The same thing, I interrupted her, raising my voice, which I had never done before. It stunned both of us. We looked at each other silently, searching for the right words. Sadie seemed ready to be the first to break the silence, but instead she stood up and walked to the window, sighing as she looked out over our small backyard. I walked up to her and hugged her from behind, feeling her body relax in my arms. I'm so sorry about all of this, Edward. It's all my fault. I should have kept it to myself, she said quietly. But what would be the point, Sadie? I think we both know that sooner or later this would come to a boiling point. If I felt like I wasn't getting something in the relationship, it would become a problem if I didn't talk about it, I said, trying to calm her down. She turned to me and looked straight into my eyes. Are you happy, Edward? Do I make you happy? Her gaze was more serious than ever. You know how I feel about you, Sadie. But my needs are much simpler than yours. I literally can't live without you, and now that I'm starting to see things from the other side, it scares me. She put her hand on my cheek, but I gently interrupted her. What scares me most is that you are not entirely happy. I know that you love me, Sadie. I feel it with all my being. But I also know that I cannot meet the needs that are important to you. I can't just ignore it. She buried her head in my chest and hugged me tightly. Just think about it, okay? I don't need to know your decision, and I won't ask, I finished, hugging her carefully. It took some time before our relationship became normal again. There was some kind of tension, something unexpressed that gradually dissolved. It wasn't anger or hostility, but rather uncertainty and worry. After a few weeks, I felt that things had stabilized, and we were getting closer to each other again. We had sex a couple nights ago for the first time in a long time. One day, I accidentally came across her toy when I was looking for where to hide a gift for her birthday. I couldn't help but stop and remember the impact this item had on my wife. I regretted finding it because now I knew where she kept it. Against my better judgment, I started checking its location from time to time, and from its movement, I realized that she was using it. My heart immediately sank with anxiety. I walked away, trying to calm down and focus on something else. I finally had to call Dr. Sullivan because I was afraid that I was slipping into a dark state again, just when our relationship with Sadie seemed to be on the mend. "Hello, Edward. Everything is fine. You don't call often," she replied. "Sorry, Dr. Sullivan. I know I shouldn't bother you outside of sessions, but I'm really confused." "Edward, it's okay. I said you can call in case of an emergency. Tell me what happened." It only took me 3 minutes to explain what I saw and felt, and her response was just as quick. "Edward, this should make you happy. You just told me in the last session that, according to you, your relationship with Sadie has improved. You said your sex life is getting better." "Yes, but—" "No, Edward. There can't be a but here. By allowing Sadie to get the release she needed, you gave her the opportunity to get back to pleasuring you too. It's not a surprise. You gave her your blessing. You know that I will always protect your needs, Edward, but with respect, you must allow Sadie to have hers. Her love for you is something extraordinary, Edward. You should enjoy it more and analyze it less." Dr. Sullivan has never spoken to me so harshly, but I couldn't be angry because I knew she was right. Her toughness pulled me out of self-destruction. Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. Sorry if I sounded harsh, Edward, but sooner or later you will have to meet her halfway on this matter." I thanked her again and hung up. "Who were you talking to, Edward? I didn't even hear Sadie enter the room." "Oh, it was Dr. Sullivan. Everything is fine." She pressed herself against my hand. "Yes." She helped me clarify something her look said that she was waiting for a more detailed answer. She said I was being a fool, basically, which made Sadie laugh, and she kissed me on the cheek. Despite minor difficulties, things went well and life went on. I was making great progress with my VR game, and my partner, Simon, suggested doing a deal with one of the big software companies. This is more of his specialty, so I gave him the green light and asked him to keep me posted. I wanted to tell Sadie since she has always supported me in this project, but I decided to wait. I didn't want to celebrate something that might lead to nothing. After a couple of months, I noticed slight changes in Sadie's behavior. She was still there and did everything as before, but her enthusiasm during sex began to fade. It seemed like the emotional connection between us had changed a bit. It's not that she disappeared, but she definitely became different. I didn't know how to bring this up, so I decided to ask Dr. Sullivan about it at my next session. I wanted to keep our relationship strong. My curiosity got the better of me again, and despite all the red flags, I decided to check if her toy was still there. I stood in front of a small chest in our closet, wondering if I should do this. It didn't turn out well for me last time, but I still came to terms with it to some extent. And being someone who constantly makes life difficult for myself, I opened the chest. The lid slowly rose, and I saw that there were two of them, and the second one was much larger. I let go of the lid and quickly went to the bathroom to throw up the remains of my lunch. I was on my knees, wondering what to do next. I couldn't just go up and ask Sadie because that would be hypocritical. If I called Dr. Sullivan, she would probably be angry that I violated Sadie's privacy. I stayed there, spitting into the toilet, trying to figure out how to deal with this. I had no idea if Edward knew I was still going to therapy with Curtis James. He never asked, and I never talked about it. I'm not sure why I hid it, but part of me felt that Edward was threatened by the very fact of Mr. James' existence. Besides, I don't think he understood Edward well enough. One last time I had to intervene before my Dordo was destroyed. I hoped that these sessions were long over, but recently old feelings awoke in me again, and I needed to talk to someone. Despite that little mistake a few months ago, I had a story with Mr. James, and he really helped. I can't lie, Sadie. I was afraid it would rear its head again. Without Edward's participation in your sessions, you have lost that intimate connection necessary for satisfaction, Mr. James said. I nodded, although he didn't say anything I didn't already know. I tried what you recommended, although it seems wrong. At the last session, Mr. James suggested that I try to associate my sessions with past sexual experiences when I was completely satisfied. Of course, those were the times when I was dating Marcus, that bastard. I even bought a new toy that looked more like Marcus to help me. The problem was that when I finally enjoyed it, I couldn't help but feel guilty. I felt like I was cheating on Edward. With Marcus, it could all be fantasy, but it was too real for me. Yes, perhaps he is not the best candidate for such associations, given your history. He's the complete opposite of Edward, so I can see why you're conflicted. Was there no one else? Asked Mr. James. I had other lovers, but Marcus was the best by far, I answered. And could you involve Edward in this process? I know it didn't go well last time, but what if we approached it differently? In a different way? What do you mean? I asked. Okay, listen to me until the end before you reject this offer. Are you saying that I should? Before I could finish, he interrupted me. Please, Sadie, let me finish. No, I'm not suggesting it to you. Mr. James, I don't like it when you talk about Edward like that. I objected. I'm just telling the truth, Sadie. I know this is hard to hear, but you came to me for help. I'm trying to help you, he said, expecting a new outburst of anger, but I restrained myself. As I said, such devices are also made for men. I thought about it, and maybe it might work for some couples, but I knew my Edward wouldn't be able to handle it. I explained this to my therapist, and he seemed disappointed. Your husband's needs will always conflict with yours, Sadie. Your other option is to look for something on the side. Edward will never know, he said. I jumped out of my chair. Are you kidding? I screamed. He stood up, probably in self-defense, and raised his hands up. Quiet, quiet. Take it easy, Sadie. I'm just trying to help you. Telling me to have sex with another man behind my husband's back? I was furious. It's not traditional, Sadie, but your relationship with Edward is also not like everyone else's. Some couples can make a dysfunctional relationship work by introducing a third person into the bedroom. When both parties understand the value, it can save the marriage, he said. Do you seriously think that this will save my marriage? Are you crazy? I shouted. Obviously, the traditional version of this won't work with Edward, but Sadie, what are you going to do? You already feel guilty. Maybe a real person can help you solve your intimacy problem, Mr. James said. You're crazy, I said, waving my hand goodbye. Look, I'm not promoting cheating on your husband, Sadie, but you're in a situation where you only have two choices. Either you will find an outlet for your sexual needs and will love your husband for the rest of your life, or you will deny yourself these needs and hope that you will not begin to hate him for what you have lost. Remember, you're still young and just getting started. These needs will only intensify, he said, and I was silent, shocked. 10 minutes passed, but I didn't say a word. I think he was afraid of provoking me even more. Finally, a quiet bell rang, signaling that our time was up. I slowly got up from the chair and headed towards the door. Sadie, this is a lot to process, but know that I am always here. If you ever think about trying something like this, contact me. There are professionals who do this with respect, tact, and complete confidentiality, he said, seeing the disgust on my face. I'm just saying it would be better than someone random. That's it. I left his office and got into the car, where I cried for more than 45 minutes, not knowing what to do. I was pleasantly surprised by myself. Despite the shock and despair, I managed to accept it for what it was. My Sadie needed to find release, and if that gave her relief, I needed to be okay with it. She gave me her all, and I was neither rational nor fair in my initial reactions. If I was proud of myself, Dr. Sullivan was delighted. I have never seen her so joyful. She said I had made great progress, filling me with praise and confidence. However, I still checked the toys regularly. I don't know why I did this, but I guess it was my way of passively participating in her needs. About 8 weeks later, when I checked the dildo situation again, I was shocked to find that they were not there. Maybe she found out I was checking them and hid them somewhere else. But I knew Sadie. If she knew that I was finding them, she would immediately talk to me to discuss everything. The only other conclusion I could come to is that she doesn't use them anymore. I wanted to be happy, but at the same time I was overcome with anxiety. I hope she doesn't deny herself again for my sake. I decided that I needed to talk to her about it. We just spent a nice evening cuddling and having sex. It wasn't the best time to bring up such questions, but as I lay there in the warm relaxation, I felt I had to ask her a question. Sadie, if I ask you a question, will you promise not to get angry? I began cautiously. Oh, Eduardo, is this high school? You know you can ask me anything. She laughed, playfully pinching my nipple. You don't use toys anymore? Suddenly, she pushed away from me and stood up, looking down at me. Edward, are you saying that you were spying on me? She asked in surprise. I explained how I accidentally stumbled upon the toys while hiding her birthday present and how Dr. Sullivan called me a fool. I won't lie. When I saw this, I felt sick, but I dealt with it in my head. Sadie hugged me tightly. I'm sorry you saw this, Eduardo. Are you sure you're okay? Yes, it wasn't easy, but I gave you my blessing, and I trust that you needed it for a reason. She sighed on my chest and kissed my neck. You are an amazing person, Edward, she whispered. I enjoyed this compliment, feeling proud of the personal growth I had achieved. I was glad that she appreciated my efforts. I noticed that they haven't been there for some time. I continued cautiously. I found a way to make it work, Edward. I think we both feel amazing after this, and it makes me so close to you. It makes me happy, she said, clinging to me even tighter. My body was filled with the warmth of love. I didn't remember ever being so happy, although no, on our wedding day, but this feeling was very close in strength. The next 3 months flew by in a pleasant whirlwind. My virtual reality project has gained real potential. Simon hired us a lawyer, and they were negotiating with one of the software companies. This could be the breakthrough that would set Sadie and me up for life. As for Sadie, she was the embodiment of happiness. She seemed to radiate sunlight, her smile was contagious. We talked for a long time about her trying to write full-time. She already had several stories published, but she wanted to write a large-scale novel, a mystery series. I supported her, but she was waiting for the right moment from the financial side. I made good money, but we needed two incomes, so I couldn't wait to surprise her with the news about my game. It was a beautiful Friday morning in October as I was driving to my next appointment with Dr. Sullivan. We were going to discuss the possibility of reducing my sessions to one per month. She said my progress over the last 6 months had been amazing and wanted to talk about it. I was 20 minutes into my 30-minute journey when her number appeared on my Bluetooth. Hello, Dr. Sullivan. I'm almost there. Oh, Edward, I'm so sorry, but I have to cancel the meeting. My husband just called and his mother had a heart attack. I need to go to the hospital, she said, apologizing. Oh God, I'm so sorry, Dr. Sullivan. Everything is fine. See you next week. Thank you, Edward. Take care of yourself. I stopped at a nearby gas station to buy a bottle of water on the way back. Though Sadie would be pleasantly surprised when I came home early. We rarely had dinner together on Fridays, except on holidays. I couldn't wait to surprise her. 20 minutes later, I pulled up to our house and parked behind Sadie's small SUV. There was a black car parked on the street in front of the house, and I looked around the area, trying to figure out who it might belong to. I entered through the back door, thinking I would find her in the kitchen, but she wasn't there. I went into the living room, and she wasn't there either. Hearing some sounds in the depths of the house, I assumed that she was in one of the bedrooms. As I got closer to the corridor, the sounds became more distinct. I stopped in front of our bedroom and heard sounds that instantly made my heart stop. The sounds of pleasure that I heard could not be confused with anything else. Two things became clear to me instantly. The voice that was screaming with pleasure was the voice of my wife, and the other sounds belonged to a man. It wasn't a toy. I don't remember walking away from the door and back into the living room, or how long I sat on the couch. I stopped feeling time. I just sat there with my head down and my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth, trying to block out everything that was happening. At some point, the sound stopped. I waited until I heard the familiar sound of a door getting stuck when opening. A tall man came out of the corridor. He almost walked past me, but at the last moment he froze when he saw my gaze. He realized that I did not pose a threat, straightened his shoulders, buttoned his jacket, and, smiling, waved his hand at me. By cuckold. As soon as he walked out the door, I threw up on my feet and began to choke on the viscous saliva. "What are you doing here?" Sadie's voice was heard. I raised my head and saw her in a robe. I immediately realized that she was naked underneath. Edward. Before she could say my name, I threw up again. I think I blacked out because my next memory is waking up on the couch with a cool cloth on my forehead. I opened my eyes and saw Sadie sitting next to me. Now she was dressed, but her face was smeared with makeup. Her nose was red and looked painful from constant rubbing. She constantly sniffed and wiped away tears. Her cheeks were wet from crying. My first reaction was to console her. My Sadie, I was upset. But then I remembered what happened. This nightmare, as soon as I started moving, she noticed it. "Edward, oh Edward," she tried to hug me. "Don't touch me," I shouted, pushing her away. This startled her, and she retreated from the couch. "Don't you dare touch me again," I shouted again. "Oh my God, Edward. Please, please let me explain everything. I know it hurts, but please listen to me," she begged me. I wanted to listen to her. There must be an explanation. My Sadie loved me. She would never do something that could hurt me that much. Or would she? "Who is he?" I was finally able to say. "He's not important, Edward. Let me," she began. "Who is he?" I shouted, instantly clutching my sore head. She started crying again, and I realized that she couldn't really explain anything yet, so I continued to speak in anger. "How long have you been cheating on me, Sadie?" She stopped her sobs and looked at me with disgust. "I know what it is, Sadie. Dr. Sullivan already explained this to me some time ago." This isn't not what you think," she stuttered through her tears. "Is it true? Then why did he smile at me and say, 'By cuckold'?" I shouted back. "No," she screamed, doubling over with sobs. "No, no, 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 no," she kept repeating over and over again. Resisting my natural desire to comfort my fragile wife, I walked past her and headed towards our bedroom. When I saw the rumpled sheets on our bed, I quickly left the room and went to the guest room. As I closed the door, I struggled to cope with the flood of negative feelings and disgusting images that flooded my mind. After a while, I was sitting curled up in a fetal position with pillows pressed against my head, but this did not help drown out all these images. I vaguely remember someone knocking on the door, but I ignored it. It took me a long time to begin to process what had happened and categorize it as Dr. Sullivan had taught me. There was another knock on the door, but I ignored it again, concentrating on getting my thoughts in order. I ended up dividing them into 3 main categories and mentally congratulating myself. Dr. Sullivan would be proud. What did I see? What do I feel? What can be done? These are the 3 categories that I was able to formulate. Normally, they shouldn't be formulated as questions, but I couldn't do it any other way. "Edward," Sadie's broken voice came through the door. "Edward, are you okay? You've been in the room for more than 5 hours. Can I come in?" "No, I'm not okay, and no, you can't come in," I answered quickly and decisively. I heard her cry quietly again and leave. I realized I needed another category. How do I feel about Sadie? It took me a long time to gain the strength to open the door. The truth is that I needed to go to the toilet and was very thirsty, so I slowly got out of bed. At first I felt dizzy, but I soon regained my balance and opened the door. I half expected to see Sadie standing outside, but she wasn't there. I walked down the hall to the bathroom and came across Sadie coming out just then. "Edward," she hugged me, but I could not, with a clear conscience, return her gesture. Please, Sadie. I need to go to the toilet. I sharply pushed her away and locked myself in the bathroom. At least here I could lock the door. I was deliberately stalling for time so as not to go out. When I finally opened the door, Sadie was still leaning against the wall waiting for me. I ignored her and headed to the kitchen to get something to drink. She followed me slowly, like a beaten dog, and it infuriated me. After pouring myself some juice, I sat down at the kitchen table. For the first time, I realized that it was already completely dark outside. How much time? I asked. 3 o'clock in the morning. You were unconscious for over 8 hours, she answered quietly. I wish I was unconscious, I replied, looking at my wife. She had once been the pillar of my life, but now she looked like a shadow of herself, broken, exhausted. All her energy and confidence were washed away by the storm that engulfed our relationship. I showed her to a chair for her to sit down on. It was already late, but I knew that everything was still far from over, and since I was back in reality, I needed to deal with this to the end. I watched as she carefully sat down on the chair, her face even worse than before. Edward, I'm so sorry, she enunciated every word. It's not what you think. Well then, but not as you think. My face remained indifferent. You have every right to hate me, but I want you to know that this is not about love. You are the only man I have ever loved, Edward. I wish I was the only man you could have had sex with, Sadie, I answered with a coldness in my voice. I was selfish, Edward. It's my fault, and it has nothing to do with you. It's not your fault, believe me. Do you have any idea how ridiculous you sound right now? It's like I don't even know who you are. I pulled my chair closer so I could lean across the table. My Sadie always protected me, always guarded my heart. You, whoever you are now, pierced my heart, in the back. Her face filled with tears again, so I sat back down and continued drinking my juice. Can you at least listen to me? Let me explain everything, she begged through tears. I bowed my head to allow her to continue. Over the next 2 hours, Sadie told me everything from her meetings with Dr. James to help her suppress her sexual desires and how they gradually developed into the conviction that she needed to discuss this with me. She repeatedly said it wasn't my fault, but that's exactly how she felt. Her attempts to use toys helped for a while, and our changes in the bedroom seemed to improve her self-esteem. But over time, these feelings went away again, and the terrible feeling of rejection returned to her. And now, finally, she told how she started dating Mr. James again. So he basically told you to have sex with someone else behind my back. No. Well, yes. He gave me a couple of ideas, but I knew you couldn't do it. I saw how you reacted to me with the toy. I couldn't put you through that again, she said. I thought about her words, but she was probably right. He told me I had two choices. Find a sexual partner for release and devote all other moments of my life to loving you, or deny myself my needs and hope that I never start to hate you for depriving myself of something important. She looked at me with pain. And Edward, I chose the selfish path. I'm sorry. I hoped that I could keep this dirty part of my life separate from you and love you for the rest of my life. It was stupid. I'm so sorry. I felt that I was once again confronted with the consequences of my shortcomings. I left my wife so unsatisfied that she was faced with such a terrible choice. A choice no woman should ever have to make. It's a shame you ever fell in love with me, Sadie. It's a pity we met at all. Don't say that. I can't imagine my life without you, she objected. Did you like it? I asked, looking into her eyes. What? She pulled back. Sex. I looked at her carefully. Don't make me answer this question, she tried to pull away. It's a simple question, Sadie. Did you like it, or were you faking it? Confusion flashed across her face, and she nodded slowly. Yes, did you like it, or yes, were you pretending? Yes, I liked it. Are you satisfied? It made me feel alive. I haven't felt this way since. She hesitated. With Marcus, I already knew the answer from her eyes. How long has this been going on? For the first time during the entire conversation, I felt control over my emotions. The pain was real, but I needed to know the truth. The truth sets you free, they say. The first time I couldn't. He came back the next week, and I started crying, so he stopped. And the next week. We did it, but I tried not to participate. Today I participated. She looked at the floor in embarrassment. These words were like a punch to the stomach. Maybe I wasn't ready for the truth after all. How long, Sadie? I asked quietly but demandingly. Uh, a month. Maybe 2, she said. I spat the juice onto the table. Edward, I promise you. Never again. It's over. I can't do this to you anymore. No more therapy sessions. No more toys. I won't hurt you. I love you. She was already bursting into tears. Are you ready to give up all your sexual pleasures for the rest of your life? For me? Only from this. I need your closeness, Edward. Don't you understand? You are all I need, she exclaimed, begging me to believe her. But we've already found out that I can't give you what you need. You give me so much, Edward. All I need is you. Please believe me. I got up from the table and headed towards the door. Edward, where are you going? I need to be alone, Sadie. It's all too much. I need time to figure out what to do next. I headed to the guest room, but before closing the door, I said a few more words. Now I understand that I should have agreed not to go to the party. Then you would be happier. Even if you didn't end up with Marcus, you would have found someone who was just as special to you and could give you what you deserve. We would have remained friends. This would be the best solution, I think. Instead, you spent your life desperately trying to find a way to come to terms with disappointment, I sighed. Please give me space, Sadie. I will no longer allow myself to be manipulated. I heard her sobbing as I closed the bedroom door again. Lying on the bed, I saw the sun rise. I was immobile and exhausted. Sleep never came to me, only pain and a feeling of loss. My anger gradually faded, and I began to regret some of the things I said to Sadie and the way I did them. I had never spoken to her with such anger in my entire life, and now I had hurt her myself. As I said earlier, it's true. I could have lived if we were just friends, but since that day on the playground, Sadie has made it her life's goal to protect me. She sacrificed her future, her present happiness. For what? Out of pity. Because I suffered a head injury. Because I was different. Because I didn't have anyone. I shook my head as I realized all these things. I knew she loved me, but I saw that she was trapped. How could she ever leave me? She knew I would have broken, and broken badly. She couldn't live with it if she left me. When fatigue finally began to take over, I came to one painful but clear conclusion. There was only one way to free her from this trap. It wasn't an ideal solution, but I didn't see any other option. I don't think I've ever felt so insignificant in my life. When I almost lost Edward all those years ago, I vowed to love and protect him for the rest of my life. So what did I do? I loved this man so much and thought I could handle any problems by being his wife. Now I realize how naive those thoughts were. In my attempts to love him, I have only destroyed his self-esteem and broken his heart for the past 9 months. Was I selfish? Oh, stop lying to yourself, idiot. Yes, you were selfish. I wanted quick answers rather than working on long-term solutions. Sex therapy, counseling, intimacy work. There were many other options. I thought seeing my own therapist was a good step, and then suddenly I started using toys as a substitute, and, oh my God, I did it. I really turned him into a cuckold. That wasn't my intention, but that's exactly what I did. I thought I had cried all my tears, but it turns out I was wrong. Again. I don't remember when I fell asleep or how long I slept, but I sat on the bare mattress, looking at the dirty sheets left after my betrayal. Just thinking about it made me sick. I kicked the dirty sheets aside, planning to throw them in the trash later. Now I need a shower. Once I was dressed, I left the bedroom and stood in front of the spare room door. I wanted so badly to go inside and hug my Edward, but he made it clear that he needed space. It hurt me when he said he was tired of being manipulated. I had never, ever tried to manipulate him on purpose, but now I understood where he got this feeling from. I took the keys and got into the car. I had things to take care of. I had to make things right for Edward. I had to. My first stop, Curtis James's office. Excuse me, madam, but he is now at the reception. May I? Madam, don't worry. It won't last long. I opened the door to his office with such force that both he and the blonde sitting opposite him jumped. You damn piece of shit. You set me up, right? You don't care about me and my husband. You like to ruin marriages, you fucking bastard. Sadie. Please, calm down. What are you talking about? Everything I suggested was in the best interest of your marriage. He literally retreated behind his desk. You convinced me to change. Fuck you. I looked at the poor blonde, who was terrified. When he gets to the point where he tells you to consider options outside of marriage, do yourself a favor, hit him and leave. I turned back to this piece of shit. His hands were in front of his groin, as if I was going to come up and hit him. Be careful when you cross the street. You never know who's driving there. I walked out of his office past the frightened secretary. Returning to the car, I hit the steering wheel with all my might. When the anger subsided, I burst into tears again, laying my head on the steering wheel. I almost didn't notice the light knock on the window. When I turned my tear-stained face, I saw the same blonde from the bastard's office standing at my window. I rolled down the window. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I shook my head several times. "No, not okay at all." "He really?" I looked into her eyes. He did it so smartly. He convinced me that this was the best way out. I started crying again, and she put her hand on my shoulder. "I'm really sorry. Maybe you need a cup of coffee or something." I smiled at her kind offer. "Thank you, but I need to fix everything with my husband. I have no time to waste." She patted me on the shoulder and smiled softly as she left. I sat in the parking lot for a long time, not trusting myself behind the wheel. I needed someone to talk to, and the only person who knew Edward as well as I did was Dr. Sullivan. I called her, but it went to voicemail. I left a message, hoping it made some sense, and hung up. I put my head back on the steering wheel and tried to calm down. When I finally felt a little better, I sat up straight. Unfortunately, at that moment, I saw my vile therapist crossing the parking lot. I started planning. I started the engine. I was seriously going to back up and hit that bastard. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your point of view, he stopped and got into a black car. Plan B was to drive into his expensive car, but before I could carry it out, the phone rang. I looked at the Bluetooth display and saw the name Dr. Sullivan. At that moment, the rational part of me won, and I answered the call. "Sadie, are you okay? Your message was so exciting." I started crying. I couldn't even speak, my throat was dry and my voice was gone. I was a complete mess. "Sadie, I'll ask the secretary to reschedule my next appointment. Stay on the line, okay?" I could only sob quietly in response. I heard calm music on my phone while I tried to get ready. How could I let things go this far? What was I going to tell Dr. Sullivan? I knew she would be angry with me, but I needed to talk to someone who knew Edward. I hoped she could help me fix this. "Sadie, are you still here?" She joined the call again. I sobbed several times. Yes, a few more sobs. I ruined everything. Finally, I managed to say it. "Are you safe?" she asked. "Yes." I parked my car. "Fine. Let's do some breathing exercises to calm ourselves down, okay?" At first, I didn't want to do it, but as she continued, I felt my anxiety levels gradually decrease, and I was finally able to relax. When I felt ready, I started talking, and talking and talking. I don't know how much time passed, but Dr. Sullivan didn't interrupt me even once. She listened calmly and patiently until I expressed everything. "Oh, Sadie." I heard disappointment in her voice. "Thank you for your honesty. It must have been hard for you to admit this. I can't give you advice right now, as it would put me in conflict with Edward's privacy. It doesn't mean we can't talk. It's just—" "I understand, Dr. Sullivan. You have a long relationship with Edward. Sorry for calling. I didn't know what else to do." I sobbed. "Well, first of all, I'm going to investigate this Curtis James guy. What you told me gives me a lot of troubling thoughts. Secondly, as for Edward, I'll see him in a couple of days, and then I'll have a better idea of his condition. I'm a little surprised he didn't come to me with something so catastrophic. I've never seen him so collected. I mean, he was completely broken and wouldn't let me near him, but when we finally talked, he was focused. You know, I heard her think and say a quiet hum. In the meantime, be close to him, but don't put him in a corner. Talk to him if he wants, but don't be intrusive. It will take a long time for him to be able to structure it and comprehend it. He doesn't think like you or me, Sadie, but you know that. She fell silent for a second. And one last thing, Sadie. I'm not sure how Edward will get out of this situation, but you have to honestly decide for yourself what you want. I always thought you were fully involved, but now I'm not so sure. You can't sit on the fence, Sadie. It's unfair to him. Her words hit me harder than if she had screamed. I understand. Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. She hung up without waiting for me to say goodbye. The next few days were unbearable. My beloved man hugging me was broken into pieces. He could barely look at me, let alone talk or touch me. I did as Dr. Sullivan advised and took time off from work to be there as often as possible. Even when he was hiding in his office, working on his project, I would peer through the slightly open door, bringing him food and drinks. He never mentioned what happened, and I didn't bring it up either. So often I wanted to ask for forgiveness, to beg him to forgive me for my stupidity, but Dr. Sullivan's words echoed in my head, and I held my emotions in check for now. I tried not to be too caring so that he wouldn't think I didn't feel guilty, but maintaining that balance wasn't easy. The hardest part was going to bed separately. He did not come into our bedroom and made it clear that I was not welcome in his. I fell asleep crying every night. Our silent routine continued in the morning as he got ready for his appointment with Dr. Sullivan. I knew it was a slim hope, but I still hoped that she could convince him to talk to me. On the outside, I tried to hold on, but on the inside, everything was terrible. As he took the keys and headed out the door, I said goodbye and told him I loved him. He stopped at the door and came up to me, hugging me tightly and warmly like never before. My heart soared. I felt his love coming straight from my soul. We stood there for a long time in our silent embrace. I love you, Sadie, he whispered in my ear, and then he released me and headed for the door. When the shock passed, I went to the door and shouted after him, I love you too, my Dwardo. Tears of joy rolled down my face. For the first time in days, I felt like there might be a chance to ask for forgiveness, a chance to change, a chance for the future. With new hopes, I got lost in the daily routine. Laundry, cleaning, and the like, everything that I usually didn't like to do now seemed important. I looked at my watch, 16:15. I was glad that he would start the session soon. With a determined spirit, I continued to do things, believing that I could turn things around. About an hour later, the phone rang. The screen said, Dr. Sullivan, and I immediately thought that perhaps she wanted to invite me to a session. I answered excitedly. Hello, Dr. Sullivan. Hi, Sadie. Do you know Edward is on his way? I looked at my watch. It was already 16:45. Well, yes, he left about an hour ago. Has he arrived yet? She sensed the worry in my voice. I'm sure it's nothing, Sadie. He's already been late a couple of times. Sometimes there can be problems on the roads. I'm sure he will be there soon. Okay? Could you text me when he arrives, so I know he's okay? Certainly. Take care of yourself. She hung up. My mood instantly worsened. I tried to remain rational, but when the situation is unstable, you always start imagining worst-case scenarios. Gloomy images of the accident came into my head, and I immediately pushed them away with a shudder. Against my inner voice, I wrote him a message, but after 15 minutes it remained unread. By 17:20, I was already rushing around the house like crazy. I was about to call Dr. Sullivan again when she called me back. Has he arrived? I practically screamed into the phone. No, Sadie, I didn't come. I contacted the local sheriff, and they are checking traffic conditions, including accidents. I heard myself inhale sharply. Sadie, I ask you to remain calm. All we know at the moment is nothing. Don't turn this into a disaster. I'm sure there will be an explanation. I cried into the phone. I have a feeling, I whispered. Premonition. How do you feel, Sadie? Something bad happened to him, I said with difficulty. This is a typical reaction when a loved one disappears. Don't let it get the better of you, okay? I'll be in touch. I couldn't even say goodbye. My stomach was twisting into knots. Did Edward feel the same way? He tried to explain to me the physical pain he felt when he saw me with the toy. God, I hope not, because this is unbearable. 5 o'clock slowly turned to 6, 7, 8:30. Still no word. I wrote to Dr. Sullivan, but she didn't hear from me either. I looked at my 10 unread messages and 13 unanswered calls to Edward, desperately hoping he would call me. I was lost in my thoughts when I heard a knock on the door. He scared me, and running to the front door, I almost collapsed on the floor in horror when I saw 2 policemen on the threshold. I fell to my knees, and the policewoman quickly helped me up and sat me down on the sofa. Another policeman walked into the kitchen and poured me a glass of water. Mrs. Anderson, I ask you to take a deep breath, the woman began. We just need to ask you a few questions about your husband. I took the water and, breathless, asked, Is he dead? We don't know that, ma'am, so we need to ask you a few questions. I nodded, and she continued, Was everything okay with you and Mr. Anderson? Have you quarreled or had any problems in your marriage? What does this have to do with finding my husband? I asked with undisguised anger, looking at her. We found his white Honda Civic parked in the middle of the Greystone Bridge. The driver's door was open, but there was no sign of your husband, another police officer explained. I knew this bridge well. We often went there just to look at the rushing water below. The water swirled and churned, raising fine mist to a height of 40 feet to the place where we stood. We could stand there for hours just enjoying the view. This was one of our favorite places. You mean he jumped? The glass slipped out of my hands and broke on the floor. We don't know Mrs. Anderson. We have a team there looking for evidence. As far as we know, he went for a walk. The problem is that due to his remote location, there are no cameras nearby to help us, and his phone is either switched off or broken. A female officer took control. That's why we're here. We are trying to understand his state of mind. Do you know where he was going? He has a standing appointment every week with Dr. Sullivan. May I ask what meetings we are talking about? He's always had difficulty with social interaction and things that you and I take for granted. He was unofficially diagnosed with borderline Asperger's syndrome as a teenager, but also suffered a severe head injury, which appears to have exacerbated some of his problems. Do you happen to have this doctor's number? I nodded and handed her my phone with contact information. She showed the number to her partner, who nodded and dialed the number, heading outside. The female officer asked me all sorts of questions about Edward, and I tried to focus and give her the answers she needed. He had no friends except online ones. He worked from home 99% of the time. He had no real hobby. He always said that he didn't need them because he had me. Shit, I'm crying again. We looked at her male partner when he returned. I just talked to Doc. She doesn't believe death would be Edward's motive. She didn't think he could handle the stress of this. He was Mia at the moment. If you have photos, a meme, I would like them to be shared among our people. I ran to our bedroom, pulled out 3 photo albums, and took them back to the living room. They took 6 photographs that they thought would be most useful. After a few more minutes, they asked if I could call someone. They advised me not to be alone. I nodded my head and called my friend Lucy. They waited until I confirmed she was on her way, then gave me their business cards and left. I couldn't sit and do nothing with this information, so I jumped in the car and drove to the scene. Looking back, I realized that I was in no condition to drive. I couldn't remember a single traffic light, stop sign, or vehicle as I arrived 35 minutes later. The small highway was closed, and I saw bureaucratic red tape everywhere. In the distance, I saw Edward's white car still parked on the bridge. At first, the police weren't going to let me through, but my sobs seemed to convince them that it was my husband's car. "Sorry, Mom, you can't be here. We are processing the scene." The policeman stopped me before I could reach the car. This, this is my husband's car. Have you found him?" I looked past the officer and saw two small boats going downstream. I gasped, knowing what they were doing. The officer turned around and immediately understood. "It's a routine, Mom. We must act quickly to achieve all possible results. This doesn't mean." I couldn't hear any more. I ran back to my car. As soon as I got there, the door suddenly swung open. "Ma'am," the officer's voice overtook me. "You shouldn't drive now. Officer Sims will take you home in your vehicle, and I will follow." I looked at him and felt like I was about to start arguing, but he continued. "You have two choices, ma'am. Either Officer Sims will take you home in your car, or we will take you to my car. We can't allow you to drive in this condition." There was no point in arguing, so I let them take me home. When I returned, my friend Lucy was already sitting on my steps, phone in hand. "Sadie, I called you for almost an hour." She ran up to me and hugged me. "Sorry, I didn't take my phone with me," I answered honestly, trying to compose myself. Lucy helped me into the house, where I collapsed on the sofa. I was absolutely exhausted, but sleep did not come. Lucy fussed over me, trying to help with something. We talked when I had the strength. I couldn't tell her everything, not because I didn't trust her, but because I was too ashamed of my actions. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. How could she look at me? I was lost in my thoughts when the phone ringing made me jump. At first I ignored it, but whoever called just dialed the number over and over again. Finally, after the fourth time, I found it. "Hello," I shouted into the phone. "Sadie, this is Dr. Sullivan." I immediately regretted my impulse. "Oh, hi. Sorry, Dr. Sullivan. I have. I started crying again. "I'm not doing very well." I finally pulled it out. "Sadie, I would really like you to come to me. Do you think you can do it?" "I don't know. What's the point? I ruined everything. I killed Edward," I blurted out in despair. "Sadie, listen to me. Sadie, you didn't kill Edward, you understand." I was too overwhelmed to answer. All I could do was cry into the phone. "Listen, I'm driving home. Can I come and check on you?" The best I could offer was a whimper. "I'm on my way, Sadie. I'll be there in 45 minutes. Please don't let the darkness take over you. Please wait for me." She hung up, and I dropped the phone to the floor. Soon I found myself there too, on the floor in a heap. It didn't feel like 45 minutes, but soon I heard Dr. Sullivan knock and enter our house. "Sadie, Sadie," I heard her calling me, but could not answer. I heard her feet move from room to room as she continued to call my name until she finally made her way into our bedroom. She gasped when she saw the state of my bed and then finally turned to me lying on the floor. "Sadie, it's okay, honey. Now I can hear. Let's talk, okay?" She knelt next to me, brushing my tousled hair out of my face. My whole body just collapsed on top of her. Luckily, she caught me and hugged me tightly. Through her spanking words, I began my torment again. "I did it. I killed him. He heard me in this bed." I made a weak gesture towards the cut mattress. "His face, oh my God, his face. I killed him." That's all I could say over and over again. Dr. Sullivan remained silent and held me during the attack, assuring me that I didn't do it. Eventually, my crying began to subside and Dr. Sullivan hugged me tighter. "Let's get out of here. I'll make us some tea and we'll talk, okay?" She brushed my hair out of my face. "Come on, Sadie. Let's talk." In the end, I agreed and got back on my feet thanks to her help. My legs felt like rubber, and I doubted I could put any weight on them alone. She took me to our kitchen and carefully sat me down on one of the chairs, while she walked around the kitchen looking for a kettle and tea. 10 minutes later, she handed me a cup and sat down next to me. "Sadie, this will be hard to hear, but you have to hear it." I slowly looked at her. "The way you act brings no honor to Edward." I snorted. "You have always been a rock for him, and your collapse is an insult to him. You have every right to feel despair and remorse, but calling yourself his killer is crossing the line. Her stern gaze was unnerving. I wanted to protest, but I was afraid. Now, if you'll allow me, I'd like to talk to you. I looked anywhere but at her face. I felt her looking at me, and I felt like a teenager again. I focused on my cup of tea and nodded my head. Are you going to be okay, financially? She started. We had life insurance on the house, and I know Edward had a little plan at work. But since there's no proof of death, it's all up in the air right now. We had some savings, but I doubt it will last me more than 4 years or more. I have to move in 5 months, and it's a blessing in disguise. This house is just a reminder of my failures. It was also the house you and Edward bought. You also had many good years. I know because he couldn't stop talking about his house and his wife. I cried at her words. My brother is a lawyer, and I'm more than happy to ask him to help you with anything that comes up. He's a bulldog and will fight well for you. Finally, I was able to see her face. Why are you doing this for me? I'm the one who screwed it up. She looked at her cup and nodded. While it is true that you are not without sin, I also feel that you have been led astray by a very cunning deception. Deception? I asked. What deception? As I promised, I looked at Curtis James. He was once a psychologist who lost his license 8 years ago. His real name is Curtis Jameson, but he took on a famous name in an attempt to create a new life. His license was revoked for sexual harassment and unlawful detention. It seems he made his living by taking advantage of women in need. His latest efforts have been aimed at women with sexual problems in their relationships with their husbands. A man who said he was a pro at helping women. It was his cousin Philip, a small-time gambler who used sex to get money from women. What? You mean this whole therapy thing was him just trying to extort money from me? My stomach hurts. How could I not see any of this? I'm not sure how his game with you ended, but he clearly paved the way for Philip to insult you. After doing a little digging, I found 3 other women with stories not unlike yours. The authorities have him in custody. Right now, we are going to file a big case against him. And his cousin? Philip? As of today, it is still unclear, but a warrant has been issued for him. I didn't feel any better, but at least I stopped crying. He used his practice to manipulate you and, indirectly, Edward. When Edward talked about him, I thought there was some value in his initial ideas, so you can see how good he is. He even got me to support his original advice. But he gave me a choice. I still chose the worst possible one. My voice shook at my confession. Yes, you did, Sadie, but you yourself weren't in the best place. He saw this and gently nudged you, using the right triggers to make you see things the way he wanted. Oh my God, Edward knew this. He never liked him, and I thought it was just his difficulty with communication and topics, but looking back, I feel like he knew. The doctor shrugged. I don't know about that. He never told me anything directly and usually threw out confusing things at me. I looked at her face and suddenly wanted to know. Did I make him happy? Was I a good wife? Did he know how much I loved him? The last few months had been difficult for him, but in the end, all he wanted was to find a way to make you happy. Yes, he knew that you loved him. You meant the world to him, Sadie. Perhaps too much. He learned not to rely on you for everything. He was learning to take on more responsibility, but rest assured, he loved you with every fiber of his being. I choked on tears. This was both pleasant and painful to hear. Do you really think he's dead? The doctor seemed to be choosing her words carefully. Despite all the difficulties and problems that Edward faced, I honestly never would have thought that he would do something so reckless. It was out of character. Or so I thought. She took my hand. He didn't leave you anything? No note? No message? No, nothing. He hugged me the day he walked to your office and whispered in my ear that he loved me. And that was it. What about his computer? Have you checked on him? I shook my head. In fact, I couldn't even enter his office. Everything in it reminded me of my Eduardo. I didn't have the strength to start. I think I'm not ready to sort out his things yet. I think it's like admitting that he won't come back. All my strength left me again, and the good doctor hugged me as I sobbed. I continued to live as best I could for the next week. The uncontrollable sobbing had almost stopped, but the gnawing emptiness in my stomach did not give me peace. I stood at the entrance to his workroom and examined his things. A small smile appeared on my face when I saw a photo of him and me on the whirlwind ride at the fair a couple of years ago. I slowly walked over to his computer and, after some thought, touched the keyboard, bringing the screen to life. Edward never turned anything off. He had no patience to wait when creative inspiration came. Carefully picking up the mouse, I began to study the desktop. Many of the icons meant nothing to me until I saw a lone icon in the bottom right corner, simply titled Sadie. My heart jumped into my throat. Could this really be? Holding back the onset of nausea, I clicked on him. My dear daddy, my bodyguard, my best friend, the love of my life. I guess I'm no longer here if you're reading this. I know my sudden disappearance will hurt you and leave you with many questions, but despite my best efforts, it was the only way to move on. From the day you saved me from yet another pointless fight on the playground, you have dedicated your entire life to protecting me. She protected me from bullies, protected me from a society I couldn't understand, protected my heart from loneliness. But unfortunately, you got all this at too high a price. Even then you tried to protect me from your problems. I turned away because the tears were flowing so hard that I thought I would stop breathing. I walked away until I gathered the strength to continue. I love that you tried to fix everything yourself. I know that you fought for us until the very end. I want you to know. No, this is wrong. I need you to know that I don't hold it against you for what happened. Now I see what you sacrificed to be with me. What kind of man would deny his love what she needs, even if he himself cannot give it? As much as I understood, I couldn't physically, emotionally, or mentally allow myself to accept it and be okay with what you deserve. This was my weakness. I know that you will keep your word and never again seek satisfaction in these needs. Therefore, I could no longer exist. While I couldn't imagine my life without you, I also couldn't imagine a life where I kept you locked away in an unsatisfactory marriage. One of us had to stop this, and I knew you would never do it. I implore you to live and find a love that will give you everything you deserve and more. No one deserves this more than you. Please don't worry. You know that I do not feel physical pain, and now internal suffering will also go away. I don't know if I believe in an afterlife, but if it exists, come find me. I would love to hug my best friend. With love, yours Duerdo. I cried until I was exhausted, and when the emotional exhaustion finally took over, I fell asleep. It's been 3 days since I found Edward's letter, and things haven't gotten any better. I existed only in the most primitive forms. She ate and drank only to keep herself alive. I didn't turn on the TV, computer, or even look at my phone all this time. I heard him calling sometimes, but I didn't have the energy to find out who it was, let alone answer. Loneliness consumed me, and I accepted it as a form of punishment for what I had done to my marriage and my husband. At some point, I would have to tell my parents, but since they cut me out of their lives, it wasn't a priority. They believed that my marriage to Edward was a pathetic move that would ruin my life, so I offered them a choice, a life with Edward and me, or a life without me. I had no regrets. I was walking to the bathroom, thinking it would be better to relieve myself in the toilet than in my sweatpants, when my phone rang just as I walked past it. Out of sheer reaction, I glanced at the display. It was Dr. Sullivan. For the first time in days, I felt the urge to do something, and I responded. Hello? Sadie, I've been calling you for 2 days now. Are you okay? I was about to send the police to your home to check on your welfare. Her voice was soft, but I could feel her concern. Sorry, I didn't want to talk to anyone. Listen, I think it would be very useful for you to come to me. I can come to you if you want, but I would really like you to leave this house, Sadie. I found him. I whispered into the phone. What? Did you find him? Did you find anything, Sadie? The note Edward left for me. I started crying again. I didn't know how I had so many tears left in me. Oh my God, Sadie, I really wanted you to call me. You don't have to face this alone. Can you come? Maybe a friend will bring you. I will free my whole day, Sadie, please. I thought about her words. It would have been so easy to just go back to bed, but a little voice began to speak inside me. Do it for me, he whispered. I thought I was going crazy, but he was there, quietly calling me to action. I'll call my friend Lucy, I finally answered. Fine. Just text me when you leave. I will do everything to be free when you arrive. I'm not sure if I said goodbye, but as if in a dream, I soon found myself in Lucy's car, heading to Dr. Sullivan's office. Poor Lucy tried to talk to me, but I was afraid to open my mouth for fear of bursting into tears again. I climbed out of her car, smiling slightly when she said she would wait for me no matter how much time passed. Suddenly, I found myself in her office, painfully aware that the last time I was here was with Edward. Sadie, I'm so glad you came. Come in, come in. I'll make us some coffee. She took me to a different room than the one Edward and I were in. I smiled to myself. This woman knew what she was doing. I sat down on the small sofa and started looking at all the photographs on the wall. I knew she was married, but I had never seen a photo of her family. Her husband looked tall and handsome. His hair was cut short and his face was slightly weathered, but his eyes were full of life. Their two sons were copies of their father, only younger. Undoubtedly attractive. If you looked closely, you could see the mother's features. Sorry about this wall of vanity, she commented as she walked in with a tray containing 2 bottles of water and cups of coffee. You have a wonderful family, Dr. Sullivan. My voice was weak, but I spoke sincerely. Thanks, Sadie. She fell silent for a few minutes, probably hoping that I would speak first, but instead I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper that was lying there and handed it to her. She took it gracefully, but her face tensed when she realized it was Edward's note to me. I watched her read it. She seemed to be studying every word, trying to find more information. I saw her eyes fill with tears as she fought to remain professional. When she finally finished, she placed the note on the table and reached for a napkin to wipe her eyes. It took her a few minutes to come to her senses. I never expected this, Sadie. I hope you know that. If I knew he was even thinking about something like that, I would have intervened. But he never. Her eyes filled with tears again, as did mine. What should I do about it now, Dr. Sullivan? I thought that after receiving answers I would feel better, but in fact it only got worse. I feel guilty. Oh, Sadie, this is fine. You have every right to experience the feelings you experience. It's part of the process, but you can't allow yourself to believe it. Whatever decisions Edward made were his own, for his reasons. We can all look back and regret something we did or didn't say, but the reality is that no one has a perfect life. We have our own responsibilities, but so do our loved ones. Obviously, you and I disagree on his motives, and I will never agree with his choices, but Edward was a special case. He was both my favorite and most difficult client. He sincerely did not see the world the way you and I do. For us, the world is a kaleidoscope full of new colors, ideas, and impressions. For people like Edward, it was like a silent film on Super 8 tape. The simpler it was, the easier it was for him. She took a sip of water and continued. But somehow you brought him paints, Sadie. He didn't always like it, but for him there was only one important thing in life, and it wasn't his own. I choked on her words. I had a general idea why Edward was visiting her, but the depth of it was frightening. You were everything to him, Sadie. You were his caring person, his protector, his decisive force, his best friend, his reason for living. It was a dangerous pedestal that he put you on, and we worked for years to make his expectations of you more realistic, and I thought we were managing. Until then. Until I brought him to Curtis James' office to tell him I needed sexual satisfaction. I finished her thought, feeling an unpleasant heaviness in my stomach. Your concerns were legitimate, Sadie, and I always tried to keep Edward aware of it. The timing was bad, but in Edward's case, I'm not sure there was ever a right moment. I nodded, agreeing with her opinion. I was vaguely aware that she supported me in personal matters. Now I regret that I did not turn to her for a recommendation, but the fear of being judged prevented me. Speaking of Mr. James, last time I checked, he had 10 separate cases against him based on over 30 charges. It seems he had a reputation for trying to persuade wives to cheat. His cousin Philip was detained in Wisconsin during a routine check. He also faces numerous charges and already has 4 paternity cases. He seemed to be walking away from a lot of the things he did. I noticed her worried expression and quickly put 2 and 2 together. I forced him to use defense. He didn't like it, but it was necessary. I noticed a slight smile and a nod. I wanted to tell him. I looked into her eyes. I hoped that one day I would be able to explain that it was just sex. I didn't need it all the time. What we had was special on so many levels, even if it wasn't traditional, but sometimes I just needed. Feel like a woman? She finished my thought, and I nodded. This is one of the hardest questions for people, Sadie. What makes a woman feel like a woman? What makes a man feel like a man? There is no single answer. We talked for over 2 hours about Edward and the note. She believed it was his way of giving me his blessing to move on. He was right. I could never let him go. I would have fought to save our marriage, and our problems would have continued. When Lucy drove me home, I felt a little more human. The pain was still there, but now it had some perspective, and that gave hope. After saying goodbye to Lucy, I entered the house and looked around. I'll have to make some important decisions soon. I couldn't afford to live in this house alone, and I was afraid to spend all our savings. It was a sad realization, but perhaps it was for the best. I'll have to work for a few more years before I can really get back to writing. After all, bills have to be paid. I was about to enter the kitchen when I heard a loud knock on the door. I stopped for a second, wondering who it could be. In my case, probably another preacher who came to save my soul. I opened the door and saw a short, plump man in a shirt and tie. I was already on guard. "How can I help?" I tried to give a cold tone to my voice. Yes. Hello. Are you Sadie Anderson? My name is pronounced Saed. I'm Sadie Anderson. Who are you? My name is Simon Belanger. I worked with Edward. That is, we met online and developed a project together. Encouraged by meeting someone who knew Edward, I invited him into the house and offered him tea. After some awkward silence, I finally started talking. "So you worked with Edward?" "Yes, ma'am. As I said, we met online some time ago. We have never met in person. We developed the game together." He looked very nervous for a second. Is Edward here?" He must have noticed the sadness on my face because he immediately started apologizing. Sorry if that sounded tactless. I knew he was sick, but he didn't say how long he had left. "What? What was he?" "Sorry." "What do you mean?" "Well, the last time we spoke, he said that he had been diagnosed with a fatal tumor and that he didn't have long to live. I just didn't know if I'd have time to see him." I didn't know why Edward told such a story, but I wasn't going to correct him. If this is the version he wanted Simon to know, I will respect his wishes. He didn't know it either, but everything happened faster than everyone expected. It was a lie with a grain of truth, it seemed to me. Sorry for your loss, really. I've always respected Edward. It's a pity that we never managed to meet him in person. He was lost in thought for a few minutes. I recognized that look. Too often I saw him in my own reflection, and he suddenly came to his senses. "Sorry, hell yeah, let's get to the point. I promised to deliver this to you personally." He handed me a small envelope. It had Edward's name and address on it. "What is this?" I suddenly felt anxious. When our game was completed, Edward entrusted me with the commercial part. You know, finding a buyer and all that. And so, things got interesting. 3 companies became interested in the game, and we started a bidding war of sorts. So, I sold it to the highest bidder. My hand shook as I tried to open the envelope. Finally, I succeeded and took out the check. Corporate check from LLP Games Inc. The first thing I noticed was my name on the recipient's line. He made me promise that half of the sale would be in your name, Simon added. The second thing I noticed was the amount. Is it really true? $1,450,000? My surprised look made Simon smile. Yes, that's half the deal. Oh, and they're planning on bringing the game to mobile, and we, that is, you and I, will get royalties for it. About $500 to $600,000. They said they would send a check to my lawyer in a few months. As soon as I receive it, I will send your half. I covered my mouth with my hand, choking in tears. She cried so hard that she felt mucus coming out of her nose. I started shaking and poor Simon didn't know what to do, but to his credit, he just touched my arm to try to comfort me. It took some time before I calmed down and Simon sat and waited until my emotions were under control again. Sadie, there was something else he asked me to do. I looked at him with my reddened eyes. I wonder what else my Dorado could have prepared for me. It was a message. I stared at him, waiting to hear the last words Edward wanted me to know. He said, and I quote, "Now become the writer you were always meant to be." Mazant, Mexico, 10 years later. Ah, gringo, how are you? Okay, Pablo. How is your family? Very good, gringo. My family is fine. Would you like a beer? Yes. Pablo turned to grab one of the weathered glasses from the counter and stood in front of the tap. He couldn't help but look back at the stranger who had appeared here 7 years ago. He walked into their small town with the clothes he was wearing and nothing else. His Spanish was terrible, and he himself was very thin. He walked into Pablo's family establishment and tried to ask for a job. Fortunately, his older sister Maria knew English well. Their mother sat him down at the table and fed him what she was preparing in the kitchen. At first, he wasn't very talkative. He didn't offer any explanation as to why he showed up in their village. Initially, Pablo and many of his family members thought that he was a man with problems. He acted strangely and always looked out of place. But my mother said that he was a good person just by looking into his eyes. No one ever argued with Mom. She said that he was suffering, not physically, but mentally, emotionally. After lunch, she gave him a job. He remained on their veranda for several months. The housing was modest even by Mexican standards, but it was better than sleeping on the streets. The man, who was called Gringo, never refused any work and over time found himself a part-time job with other traders. He dug, plowed, swept, and even milked goats. Months passed, but Pablo had to admit that his family and much of the small community had accepted this spiritually wounded man. Gringo was strange in his own way, and that says a lot for this village, because on its outskirts there lived a man who was trying to legally marry his alpaca. But Gringo was strange in a different way. He didn't like attention or talking. He kept to himself and never complained about the work he was assigned. The elder sister Maria became interested in the wanderer. Mom called him broken inside, but for some reason she was drawn to him. She wanted to help him deal with his demons, but he never showed any romantic interest in her, always politely keeping his distance. However, she continued to quietly tend to him in the hope that he would change. She smiled as she watched him earn the respect of the other villagers. Gringo, who gave his time freely to those who needed it, was not a man who accepted help or gestures. When they offered him an old, dilapidated hut, he categorically refused. In his opinion, he did not deserve such a gesture. Despite all the efforts of Maria and Pablo, only his mother was able to persuade him to change his mind. One day, she took him for a walk, and when they returned, the family helped fix the house so he could live in it. Mom never told me how she managed to change his mind. She just said that he was now healing. His home was organized and simple. He took meticulous care of every detail, taking pride in both the exterior and interior decoration. Maria gave him an old computer that had been donated to one of the hostels in a nearby village. Few people here used computers since access to the internet was minimal, and life itself did not really need them. Maria overheard him telling one of the villagers about his past with computers and hoped that this would help him continue his healing. A few months later, Gringo, using his own money, bought signal boosters to improve the connection and soon established an online trading business. The villagers had never imagined the power a computer could bring, and for a small fee they could send emails and order goods. Their orders usually took months to arrive, but now they received them within weeks from a warehouse just 30 minutes away. It was a great day when he and the villagers installed their own cell tower. In Mexico, infrastructure was the responsibility of the landowners, and before the arrival of the gringos, people did not know how to organize it. After 3 days, the entire village had stable access to the internet, and Gringo further strengthened his position in the hearts of the villagers. Pablo noticed the new book while bringing beer to his friend. Everyone laughed at how much money he spent on books, but he loved to read and was always willing to share them with anyone. He bought some books in Spanish to help him learn the language, but most were in his native language. "Is this a new book?" asked Pablo. "Yes, she just arrived this morning," he replied and placed the book on the counter. "Whispering Trees, Where Evil Hides." Pablo tried to read. Name in English. "Is this a joke book?" "No, this is a detective series. Una Sarai de Misterio y Asesinato," he repeated in Spanish. "It's been #1 on the bestseller list for 12 weeks. Pablo took the book and turned it over. On the back was a photograph of the author with her husband and child. "What is this?" asked Pablo. "Oh, this is the author. She's new, but all the reviews about her books are very positive." Gringo looked at the photo of a beautiful blonde sitting with a cute girl with long blonde pigtails on her lap and a tall, handsome man standing behind her with a hand on her shoulder. He read the caption at the bottom. Sadie Morrison pictured with husband Grant Morrison and their 5-year-old daughter Miranda. Gringo smiled. There is no doubt whose daughter this is. She looks exactly like her mother did when she was a child. Pablo nodded and went into the kitchen. "Hey, Gringo, when will you make an honest woman out of Mary?" His older sister tried more than once to start a relationship with this strange white man, but he always politely refused. Their mother said it was because of his wounds. His heart can no longer let anyone else in. He looked at Pablo. "What are you talking about? Maria is the most honest person I know." Pablo just laughed at his naivety. Gringo shrugged and took the book to sit at the small table. Opening the cover, he carefully studied all the publishing details and noticed a message from the author. "No one reaches this point in life without the help and love of those around you. I had a childhood friend who always believed in me, and as we grew older, he became my biggest supporter, inspiring me to write my stories. He was a man of principles, with a heart full of love and morality. Despite all the obstacles, he was there to comfort and support me, even when I didn't deserve it. My friend is no more, and not a day goes by that I don't remember him. His laughter, his smile. Without him, I would never be where I am now. My family never had the opportunity to meet him, but I often share pieces of him through our stories. I miss him very much. All my work will forever be dedicated to my Eduardo. See you again when we embrace again in the warmest of hugs. Rest in peace, my best friend." He felt a chill run down his spine after reading those words. She had always been so talented, he thought. With a new smile on his face, he began reading her book at full volume. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.